In the late 18th century, as the young nation of America sought to find its place in the world, there were those whose ideas would help shape the course of its future. One such figure was Eli Whitney, born in 1765, whose quiet ingenuity would forever alter the landscape of American industry. It was a time of great change, a nation still in the early stages of independence, with its economy largely built on agriculture. Yet, the seeds of the Industrial Revolution were already beginning to sprout. It was in this environment that Whitney would rise to prominence, not with the power of words or politics, but through the quiet hum of machines and the turning of gears. Eli Whitney's legacy would be one of invention, of transformation. His most famous creation, the cotton gin, revolutionized the cotton industry, making it possible for the young country to thrive in a world increasingly driven by commerce and production. But his contributions went far beyond this singular invention, for Whitney also laid the groundwork for modern manufacturing, introducing the idea of interchangeable parts, an idea that would echo through history. As we journey through his life, from his humble beginnings to his enduring influence on the world, let us reflect on how one man's quiet perseverance helped shape the American story. If you enjoy this story, please consider liking the video, subscribing to the channel, and sharing where you're listening from. Let's begin our journey into the life of Eli Whitney. Eli Whitney was born on December the 8th, 1765 in the small town of Westborough, Massachusetts, nestled in the rolling hills of New England. The world he entered was one still forming, its young nation struggling to find its footing after the Revolutionary War. The United States was a land of promise, but also of uncertainty. At the time of Whitney's birth, the country was still a collection of colonies, each with its own traditions and challenges. Yet from these quiet hills, Eli Whitney would eventually emerge as a pivotal figure in American history. Whitney was the eldest of 9 children in the Whitney family, a family that placed great value on education and hard work. His father, Eli Whitney Sr., was a prosperous farmer, and his mother, Elizabeth Fay, came from a family of skilled artisans. From an early age, Whitney was surrounded by an environment where craftsmanship and ingenuity were highly regarded. Yet, as a young boy, Eli was not immediately drawn to farming or manual labor. Instead, he showed an early interest in learning and discovery. At the age of 14, Whitney left his family's farm and attended Yale College, one of the leading institutions of higher learning in America at the time. Yale was located in New Haven, Connecticut, a bustling town that offered a stark contrast to the rural simplicity of Westborough. It was here, away from the quiet of his home, that Whitney would first encounter the intellectual world that would shape his future. While at Yale, Whitney's academic interests began to take root. He excelled in the study of science and mathematics, subjects that would later become central to his work. Though his early years at Yale were marked by a strong academic performance, he was also introduced to the world of invention. Whitney was not content with simply reading about others' discoveries. He began to develop his own ideas. In his spare time, he constructed small machines and devices, tinkering with various mechanical designs. These early experiments would lay the groundwork for his later groundbreaking inventions. It was during this time that Whitney's natural curiosity began to blossom. He was fascinated by the workings of machines, particularly the tools used in manufacturing. He observed that many machines were still quite rudimentary and inefficient. This observation would later inform his thinking as he would go on to develop some of the most important inventions of his time. Upon his graduation from Yale in 1792, Whitney's life took a different turn. He was not immediately drawn to the world of academia or the fields of law and business, as many of his peers were. Instead, he sought a path of practical application, one that would allow him to combine his love of invention with his desire to create something lasting. This decision would lead him to the South, where his ingenuity would change the course of American history. In the years that followed, Whitney would travel to Georgia, where he would encounter a world vastly different from the New England landscape of his youth. It was here that his life took a significant turn, as he would find himself in the midst of an agricultural society dominated by the cultivation of cotton. Whitney's keen understanding of machines and his inventive nature led him to a discovery that would change not only his life, but the fabric of American society. But before we journey into the creation of the cotton gin, it is important to reflect on the foundation that was laid during these early years. Eli Whitney's education was not limited to his time at Yale or the tools of his trade. His early life was one of constant learning, of observing the world around him and questioning how things worked. He grew up in an environment that encouraged thoughtfulness and perseverance, and this would serve him well as he moved into the later stages of his life. Whitney's youth was marked by an intellectual curiosity that transcended the typical academic pursuit. His interest in mechanics and his ability to see beyond the ordinary shaped the path he would eventually take. While his peers were often content with the conventional, Whitney's mind was restless, always seeking something new. In this way, the quiet countryside of New England and the academic halls of Yale formed the perfect backdrop for his eventual rise as an inventor and industrialist. The transition from youth to adulthood was not without its challenges, however. Whitney's early years were not free from struggle. Like many in his time, he faced the reality of a nation still in its infancy, with limited opportunities and much uncertainty. Yet, he persevered. Through hard work, dedication, and a willingness to embrace new ideas, Whitney was able to carve out a place for himself in the world of invention. His education, both formal and informal, provided him with the tools he needed to face the challenges ahead. As we move forward in Eli Whitney's story, it becomes clear that his early life and education played a significant role in shaping his future. The combination of intellectual curiosity, a passion for invention, and the solid foundation provided by his family and education laid the groundwork for the revolutionary ideas that would follow. It is in these formative years that the seeds of the cotton gin and the future of American industry were sown, though no one at the time could have known the profound impact Whitney would have on the nation's development. As Eli Whitney completed his studies at Yale and moved into adulthood, the world around him was changing. The United States, though young, was beginning to establish itself as a growing nation, its economy still deeply rooted in agriculture. Yet the winds of change were stirring. The Industrial Revolution, still in its early phases in Europe, was starting to make its way across the Atlantic. In this atmosphere of possibility and new beginnings, Whitney's path toward innovation began to take shape. At the time, most of the nation's wealth was tied to agriculture, with cotton serving as one of the most valuable commodities in the southern states. However, the process of harvesting cotton was slow and labor-intensive. The seeds, which were tightly embedded in the cotton fibers, had to be manually separated by hand, a tedious task that required great effort and time. The inability to efficiently process cotton limited its production, keeping the industry in a state of stasis. Whitney, though newly graduated from Yale, was still searching for a way to apply his talents in a meaningful way. He took a position as a tutor for a wealthy family in Georgia, a position that would eventually set him on a path toward a monumental discovery. While in the South, Whitney was introduced to the world of cotton cultivation firsthand. He observed the challenges plantation owners faced in processing cotton and the inefficiencies that stifled productivity. It was during this time that a spark of inspiration began to take root in his mind. In Georgia, Whitney was introduced to Catherine Greene, the widow of General Nathaniel Greene, a prominent figure in the Revolutionary War. Catherine, recognizing Whitney's intelligence and potential, invited him to stay on her plantation. It was there, surrounded by acres of cotton fields and the harsh realities of agricultural labor, that Whitney would have the idea that would change his life and the course of American history. As he spoke with local plantation owners about their struggles, Whitney began to see an opportunity for innovation. He understood that cotton could become a more valuable crop if there was a way to separate the seeds from the fibers more quickly. This would allow the South to produce cotton on a far larger scale and meet the growing demand for the textile industry. Whitney's mind turned toward the development of a machine, something that could automate the laborious process of cotton separation. Whitney's inspiration, however, was not the result of a single moment of divine insight, but rather the culmination of his observations, education, and experiences. His understanding of machinery and his natural curiosity about how things worked guided him toward a solution. At Yale, Whitney had studied the principles of mechanics and engineering, knowledge that would prove vital in the years to come. His previous experiences, including his time spent working with tools and constructing devices, also provided a foundation for his future work. What emerged from this blending of intellect and experience was a new approach to solving an age-old problem. Whitney's idea was simple, but revolutionary. A machine that could quickly and efficiently separate the cotton fibers from the seeds. This idea would eventually become known as the cotton gin. The concept itself was not unprecedented. There had been attempts before to create a machine for this purpose, but none had been effective. Whitney's innovation lay in the design of the machine itself, which combined several different mechanical principles in a new way. He understood that the key to success was creating a machine that could be operated by a single person, one that would reduce labor costs and increase efficiency on a scale never before imagined. In 1793, Whitney built a prototype of the cotton gin. The machine was simple in appearance. A wooden box with a set of rotating teeth and a system of mesh screens that would comb through the cotton fibers, pulling the seeds free. While the mechanics of the gin were rudimentary by today's standards, the effect it would have on the cotton industry was profound. With the cotton gin, Whitney had solved a problem that had long plagued the South. The machine could process cotton at a speed that far surpassed human labor, allowing farmers to produce much more cotton in less time. The implications for the economy were immediate. The South could now cultivate far more cotton, feeding the burgeoning textile industry in the North and Europe. Whitney's machine, simple yet effective, became a game changer. However, Whitney's success did not come without challenges. Though his invention had the potential to transform the agricultural landscape, he found himself locked in legal and intellectual battles over the patent rights to the cotton gin. At the time, there was little protection for inventors, and Whitney's efforts to claim ownership of the machine were met with resistance from other inventors and from plantation owners who had seen the potential of his invention. Nonetheless, Whitney's ingenuity could not be ignored. His cotton gin would eventually become widely adopted, and the invention would have far-reaching consequences, not only for the economy, but for the institution of slavery in the South. Whitney's creation increased the demand for cotton, which in turn fueled the expansion of slavery to meet the needs of the growing agricultural industry. This unforeseen consequence of Whitney's innovation would have profound effects on the social and political fabric of the United States, and it remains a significant aspect of his legacy. Yet, as the cotton gin revolutionized the production of cotton, it also began to reveal the complexities of progress. Whitney's invention had sparked a new era of industrialization in the United States, but it had also deepened the divisions between North and South. The South became more reliant on slave labor to meet the demands of cotton production, while the North began to develop its own industrial infrastructure. Whitney's role in this transformation, though complex and multifaceted, would ultimately establish him as one of the most important inventors in American history. The spark of innovation that began with a simple observation on a Georgian plantation would grow into a legacy that would shape the nation's economic future and its social realities for generations to come. In 1793, Eli Whitney's vision began to take shape in a most remarkable way. After years of thought and careful design, he built the first cotton gin. The machine, though simple in design by today's standards, was nothing short of revolutionary for its time. It would forever change the course of history, transforming the Southern economy and laying the groundwork for industrial production in America. Whitney's invention, once completed, was poised to alter the fabric of the nation. The cotton gin was an ingenious solution to a long-standing problem. At its core, the machine's purpose was clear: to separate cotton fibers from the seeds, a task that was previously done by hand. Cotton, at that time, was a crucial crop for the southern states, yet the process of removing the seeds from the cotton bolls was laborious and slow. It was a highly inefficient method, and it limited the potential for large-scale cotton production. The cotton gin, in contrast, promised to change that. Whitney's design was simple yet effective. The machine consisted of a wooden box with a rotating drum, its surface lined with a rows of wire teeth. These teeth would pull the cotton through narrow slots, where the fibers would be separated from the seeds. The cotton would then be pulled through a mesh screen, which would catch the fibers while allowing the seeds to fall away. This process, unlike the labor-intensive handpicking of cotton, could be completed in a fraction of the time. It was a true breakthrough in the world of agricultural machinery. The first cotton gin Whitney built was not an overly complex or finely crafted machine. It was built from readily available materials such as wood and wire, and it relied on a straightforward mechanical process. Yet, the results were astonishing. The machine could clean more cotton in a single hour than a person could do in an entire day. Whitney's cotton gin could process up to 50 pounds of cotton in a single day, while a person could only process about 1 pound by hand. This difference in efficiency would prove to be the catalyst for the rapid spread of the cotton gin throughout the South. Though the cotton gin was a mechanical marvel, its impact was not limited to its immediate effectiveness. The machine's potential to transform the cotton industry was apparent from the moment it was introduced to the public. Plantation owners saw in the cotton gin the possibility of increasing their cotton yields dramatically, and with it, their profits. What was once a tedious and slow process could now be completed in a fraction of the time, allowing them to produce cotton in far greater quantities. However, as with any new technology, the introduction of the cotton gin was not without its complications. Whitney's machine was met with skepticism at first, as many people doubted its practicality and long-term viability. It took some time for the cotton gin to gain widespread acceptance. Yet as the results became clear, the demand for the machine grew. Plantation owners began to request more gins, and soon Whitney found himself inundated with orders. The success of the cotton gin brought Whitney both recognition and challenges. While the machine was undeniably effective, the question of ownership and intellectual property quickly became a source of contention. At the time, patent laws in the United States were weak, and there were few protections for inventors like Whitney. Though he had patented the cotton gin in 1794, there was little to prevent others from building their own versions of the machine. Whitney's patent, as it turned out, would be of little protection against widespread infringement. As the cotton gin spread throughout the South, many plantation owners and manufacturers began to build their own versions of the machine. Whitney was faced with the daunting task of defending his patent rights against these infringing designs. This legal battle would become one of the most challenging aspects of his life, and it would define his relationship with the cotton gin for years to come. Despite the widespread adoption of the cotton gin, Whitney found himself locked in a prolonged struggle to secure his intellectual property. Many in the South, particularly those who stood to benefit from the increased production of cotton, were eager to bypass Whitney's patent and create their own versions of the machine. In response, Whitney was forced to take legal action to protect his invention. The legal battles were drawn out, and the process of enforcing his patent was slow and costly. Yet over time, Whitney's patent was upheld in court, and he was ultimately granted the recognition and compensation he deserved. While Whitney's legal battles were ongoing, the cotton gin itself continued to have a profound impact on the Southern economy. The increase in cotton production was immediate and dramatic. The gin made cotton farming far more profitable, as farmers could now cultivate large amounts of cotton without the laborious task of hand-picking. This shift in production allowed cotton to become the South's most important cash crop, fueling the growth of plantations and driving the economy of the region. However, the success of the cotton gin was not without its darker consequences. As cotton production soared, so too did the demand for labor. The gin made cotton farming more efficient, but it also deepened the South's reliance on slavery. The increase in cotton production led to the expansion of slavery in the South, as more labor was needed to cultivate the cotton fields. While Whitney's cotton gin had been intended as a tool to improve productivity, it ultimately contributed to the entrenchment of slavery in the United States. Though Whitney's cotton gin became a symbol of industrial progress, its impact on American society was complex. On one hand, it revolutionized the cotton industry, providing a boost to the Southern economy and paving the way for the rise of industrial manufacturing in the United States. On the other hand, it inadvertently reinforced the system of slavery, creating a paradox in which technological progress and human suffering went hand in hand. This duality of progress and its consequences would be a constant theme throughout the history of the cotton gin and Whitney's legacy. Despite the challenges and the unintended consequences of his invention, Whitney's cotton gin remained an undeniable success. It transformed the South's economy and played a central role in the development of American industry. The gin's widespread adoption and Whitney's subsequent legal battles solidified his place in history as one of the nation's most important inventors. And while the cotton gin's legacy is forever intertwined with the history of slavery in the United States, it also stands as a testament to the power of innovation and the potential for technology to reshape the world. The cotton gin, though a remarkable invention, came with consequences that were not immediately apparent. While it revolutionized cotton production and brought great economic prosperity to the southern states, it also played an unintended and pivotal role in the entrenchment of slavery in America. Before the cotton gin, cotton cultivation was a labor-intensive process. The seeds embedded in the cotton fibers had to be separated by hand, a process that was both slow and physically demanding. The labor required to harvest and process cotton limited the scale of production, making it less profitable and less appealing to large-scale farming operations. The cotton gin, by contrast, vastly accelerated this process, enabling a single person to clean cotton far faster than could be done by hand. This sudden surge in productivity would have profound and far-reaching effects, particularly on the institution of slavery. As Whitney's cotton gin became more widely adopted, it allowed cotton plantations to produce cotton at an unprecedented rate. In the early years of the 19th century, cotton was already an important cash crop in the South, but it had yet to reach its full potential. The cotton gin unlocked this potential, turning cotton into the dominant agricultural product of the region. The demand for cotton skyrocketed, not only in the United States but across the Atlantic, particularly in Europe, where the Industrial Revolution was driving the need for raw cotton to feed burgeoning textile mills. This surge in cotton production had a direct impact on the institution of slavery. The gin's ability to quickly process cotton made it more profitable to cultivate, which in turn encouraged plantation owners to expand their cotton operations. To meet the growing demand for labor, plantation owners turned increasingly to slavery, and the South saw a dramatic rise in the number of enslaved people. While it is true that slavery had already existed in the South, the cotton gin gave it new economic significance, reinforcing its role in the agricultural economy. The cotton gin's effect on slavery was not just quantitative, but also qualitative. As cotton became more profitable, the demand for enslaved labor increased, leading to the expansion of plantations in the Deep South. New territories were opened up for cotton cultivation, and with them, the expansion of slavery. The South's economy became more dependent on slavery, as it was seen as essential to the efficient production of cotton. In this way, the cotton gin unintentionally made slavery a central pillar of the Southern economy. Whitney himself may not have anticipated the effects his invention would have on slavery. His invention was intended to make cotton production more efficient, not to perpetuate the system of slavery. Yet the gin's success in increasing cotton production also increased the demand for cheap labor. The expansion of the cotton industry brought with it the rapid growth of the slave trade, particularly after the domestic slave trade was legalized in the early 19th century. Enslaved individuals were forcibly transported from the Upper South to the new cotton-growing regions in the Deep South, reinforcing the system that Whitney's invention had unwittingly helped to perpetuate. For many enslaved people, the cotton gin represented a continuation of their labor, not a means of easing their burdens. While the machine itself reduced the time and effort required to process cotton, it did little to alleviate the harsh conditions of forced labor in the cotton fields. In fact, the gin's success only intensified the demand for laborers, and many more men, women, and children were forced into slavery to meet the needs of the expanding cotton economy. As cotton production became more entrenched in the South, so too did the institution of slavery. By the 1820s and 1830s, cotton had become the dominant crop in the South, and slavery had become even more deeply ingrained in the fabric of Southern society. The connection between the cotton gin and slavery was undeniable. Whitney's invention had transformed the Southern economy, but it had also deepened the region's reliance on the brutal system of human bondage. The cotton gin's role in entrenching slavery would not go unnoticed in the years that followed. While the invention itself was celebrated for its technological achievement, it was also seen by many as a symbol of the moral and political contradictions at the heart of the American experiment. As the country moved toward the Civil War in the 1860s, the issues of slavery and cotton production would come to a head. The expansion of the cotton economy, driven by the success of Whitney's invention, was a key factor in the growing tensions between the North and South. The economic prosperity that the cotton gin helped bring to the South also contributed to the sense of Southern pride and independence. Plantation owners and Southern politicians, many of whom had invested heavily in the cotton economy, defended slavery as vital to the region's economic success. In the years leading up to the Civil War, the cotton gin's legacy would become a point of contention in the national debate over slavery. To many in the South, the gin symbolized the prosperity of their agricultural system, and to many in the North it symbolized the moral and political cost of that prosperity. While Whitney's cotton gin was an undeniable triumph of invention, its effects on slavery and the broader history of the United States are far more complex. The gin revolutionized cotton production, but it also perpetuated an economic system built on human suffering. The story of the cotton gin is, in many ways, a story of progress and its dark side. A reminder that the benefits of innovation often come with unforeseen consequences. Whitney's legacy, therefore, is not one-dimensional. It is a legacy of invention and industry, but also one of social and moral complexity. The cotton gin, like many technological advancements, was a tool that could be used for both progress and exploitation. As we reflect on its impact, we are reminded that the history of American industry is inextricably linked to the history of slavery, and that the consequences of invention extend far beyond the creator's intentions. Though Eli Whitney's cotton gin was a technological marvel, its creation did not mark the end of his challenges. Instead, it was only the beginning of a protracted battle to secure ownership of his invention and protect his intellectual property. In a time when patent laws were still in their infancy, Whitney found himself navigating a complex and often hostile legal landscape. Whitney had patented his cotton gin in 1794, shortly after completing his prototype. The patent was granted, giving him the legal right to control the manufacture and use of the cotton gin. This was an important step in protecting his invention, but it was far from the final hurdle. While the patent protected the idea of the gin itself, enforcing it and ensuring that others did not copy or infringe upon it proved to be an enormous challenge. At the time, patent laws in the United States were still developing. The U.S. Patent Office, established in 1790, was a relatively new institution, and there was little precedent for enforcing patents. The legal framework was not as robust or well-defined as it would become in later years. This meant that Whitney, like many other inventors of the time, faced a constant battle to defend his intellectual property. The cotton gin quickly became popular, and it wasn't long before other manufacturers and plantation owners began to build their own versions of the machine. Whitney's patent, however, was often ignored. Many felt that the gin was too simple a design to deserve patent protection, and they believed that Whitney's success was largely due to a stroke of luck rather than genuine ingenuity. As the gin spread across the South, more and more people made copies of it without compensating Whitney for his work. Whitney's legal struggle was made even more difficult by the fact that he was living in a time when intellectual property was not fully recognized as a critical aspect of innovation. Many in the South, particularly plantation owners who stood to benefit from the cotton gin, were eager to avoid paying any sort of licensing fees or royalties. They viewed the invention as a tool for their economic prosperity and were unwilling to acknowledge Whitney's claim to ownership. The widespread infringement of his patent led Whitney to take legal action in an attempt to enforce his rights. One of the most notable instances of patent infringement occurred in Georgia, where a number of planters and manufacturers began to produce their own cotton gins without authorization. Whitney, determined to protect his invention, began filing lawsuits against those who were infringing upon his patent. These legal battles were long and costly, and they strained Whitney's resources. For years he fought against those who had stolen his invention, hoping to secure the compensation he believed he deserved. In some cases, Whitney was successful in defending his patent, but the process was slow, and the legal fees mounted. He had to rely on the legal system, which was often slow to address issues of patent infringement. The case was complicated further by the fact that the patent was granted to Whitney for a specific design, but there were many variations of the cotton gin that differed in small ways. This made it difficult to prove that an infringement had occurred, as many manufacturers simply modified the original design to avoid direct copying. Despite the challenges, Whitney remained steadfast in his pursuit of justice. He was not only fighting for his own financial gain, but also for the broader principle of intellectual property protection. He believed that inventors had a right to control their creations and to reap the rewards of their work. Whitney's struggle set an important precedent for future inventors, helping to establish the importance of patent protection in the United States. Throughout this period, Whitney's battles were not just with those who infringed upon his patent, but with a legal system that was ill-equipped to handle the complexities of intellectual property. The United States was a young nation, still working to define its legal institutions, and patent law was a relatively new concept. In this environment, Whitney found himself fighting not only for his invention, but for the very idea that inventors should be afforded protection for their ideas and creations. Whitney's legal battles were long and exhausting, but over time they began to pay off. In 1807, after years of litigation, Whitney won a significant victory in the courts. The court ruled in his favor, upholding his patent and awarding him compensation for the infringement of his intellectual property. This ruling marked a turning point in Whitney's battle to protect his invention. It was a hard-earned victory, but it established his legal rights and set a precedent for the future. Despite this legal success, Whitney's struggles were far from over. Even after winning his patent battle, the cotton gin's widespread use continued to generate both legal challenges and practical difficulties. Whitney spent years fighting against those who continued to produce unauthorized versions of the gin, and his financial rewards were never as large as he had hoped. Yet despite these challenges, the victory in securing his patent rights was a critical step in establishing the principle of intellectual property protection in the United States. Whitney's experiences with patent law served as a reminder of the difficulties inventors face when trying to protect their creations. While the cotton gin was an undeniable success, Whitney's struggle to defend his invention was a testament to the complexities of intellectual property in the early years of the United States. His perseverance in the face of these challenges laid the groundwork for future generations of inventors who would benefit from stronger patent protections. Through his struggle, Whitney not only ensured that his own rights were protected, but also helped to establish the idea that intellectual property was an essential part of innovation. His legal battles, while exhausting and costly, ultimately played a significant role in shaping the future of patent law in America. Once Eli Whitney's cotton gin proved effective and its potential was realized, its adoption spread rapidly across the southern United States. What began as a single invention created in relative obscurity quickly became the backbone of the southern agricultural economy, revolutionizing cotton production. The transformation was not just technological, it was economic, social, and cultural, reshaping the very nature of the South and its relationship to the rest of the United States. When Whitney first introduced the cotton gin to plantation owners, the response was skeptical. It was a new, unfamiliar technology, and many questioned its practical value. But the results spoke for themselves. The gin, which could process up to 50 pounds of cotton a day, dramatically reduced the labor required for cotton production. In an industry where labor was at the heart of its success, this was a breakthrough. Within just a few years, cotton gins began to appear across the South. Plantation owners, eager to increase their production and profits, were quick to see the value in the machine. The efficiency of the cotton gin transformed cotton from a relatively low-output crop to one capable of being produced in large quantities. The gin not only saved time and labor but also allowed the South to cultivate far more cotton per acre than ever before. The spread of the cotton gin was not just confined to the wealthy elite or large plantations. Even smaller landowners saw the advantage in using the gin. As word of its effectiveness spread, demand for the machine surged. Whitney, overwhelmed by the increasing requests, was forced to expand his production and find ways to meet the growing demand. However, this rapid adoption also posed a new challenge: the protection of his patent. Many plantation owners, eager to avoid paying for the gin, began to make unauthorized versions of the machine. This widespread infringement was one of the key factors that led Whitney into a long and difficult legal battle to protect his intellectual property. Despite the challenges, the cotton gin was now an indispensable part of the South's agricultural infrastructure. It fundamentally changed the economic landscape, ushering in what would come to be known as the Cotton Kingdom. Before the invention of the cotton gin, cotton was considered a secondary crop in the South, cultivated alongside tobacco, rice, and indigo. But with the gin's ability to efficiently separate the cotton fibers from the seeds, cotton quickly became the dominant cash crop, driving the economic prosperity of the region. As cotton production boomed, the demand for enslaved labor grew as well. The efficiency of the gin made it possible to cultivate more cotton, but it also made it more profitable, which in turn fueled the expansion of slavery. In the early 19th century, as the cotton industry thrived, so too did the institution of slavery. Plantation owners, eager to maximize their profits, relied on enslaved labor to work the fields. The cotton gin did not abolish the need for labor. It merely made it more efficient, amplifying the demand for human workers. The growth of the cotton industry created a dangerous feedback loop, in which the demand for cotton led to an increased need for slaves, and the increase in slavery fueled the demand for more cotton. The widespread adoption of the cotton gin also had a significant impact on the Southern economy. Cotton became the backbone of the South's agricultural exports, and by the 1820s and 1830s, it accounted for a significant portion of the nation's exports. As the United States grew, so too did its influence on the global market. The South's cotton became a vital raw material for the growing textile industries of Great Britain and the northern United States. In many ways, the cotton gin was the driving force behind the South's economic boom, which was built on the foundations of cotton cultivation and slavery. Yet, as much as the cotton gin helped fuel the economic rise of the South, it also deepened the region's dependence on slavery. The invention made cotton production much more profitable, but it also created an economy that was reliant on forced labor. The gin's widespread adoption, therefore, was a double-edged sword. It was a technological advancement that revolutionized an industry, but it also perpetuated a system of human exploitation that would define the South for decades to come. The consequences of the cotton gin's rapid adoption were not limited to the Southern economy. It also had far-reaching effects on American society as a whole. As the South became more reliant on cotton, the North saw the rise of its own industrial economy. The textile mills of New England, powered by the cotton harvested in the South, flourished during this period. The rise of the textile industry in the North was, in many ways, the mirror image of the rise of cotton in the South. The North's industrial expansion and the South's agricultural boom were inextricably linked, and both were built on the foundation of the cotton gin's success. While the cotton gin transformed the South, it also helped to shape the broader history of the United States. The industrial growth in the North and the agricultural prosperity in the South created a national economy that was deeply divided. The rapid spread of cotton cultivation, fueled by the gin, solidified the South's dependence on slavery, while the North's industrial expansion led to a growing abolitionist movement. This divide between the North and South would eventually lead to the Civil War, a war that would decide the fate of the nation and its relationship to slavery. The spread of the cotton gin also had an international dimension. As the demand for cotton surged, it fueled the transatlantic economy, as British textile manufacturers and other European countries sought American cotton to feed their growing industries. The South became the supplier of the world's cotton, and the United States became a global economic power, its wealth tied to the expansion of cotton production and the forced labor of enslaved individuals. In the decades following the invention of the cotton gin, the South was transformed into a cotton-growing powerhouse. The gin's widespread adoption had cemented cotton's place as the cornerstone of Southern agriculture. Yet, it also ensured that the system of slavery would remain entrenched, as the demand for cotton grew hand in hand with the demand for enslaved labor. The cotton gin's role in this transformation cannot be understated. While it was an innovation that changed the world of agriculture, it was also a catalyst for the continuation of slavery, a paradox that would reverberate throughout the history of the United States. In 1793, after Eli Whitney had conceived his revolutionary cotton gin, his life took an unexpected turn. His invention was already showing its potential, but Whitney was not yet fully engaged with the vast world of cotton plantations that would become so central to his future. With the success of the cotton gin gaining momentum, Whitney's path would soon take him to Georgia, where his journey with the cotton gin would deepen and where he would encounter the profound challenges and realities of the Southern agricultural economy, the decision to move to Georgia was influenced by a number of factors. Initially, Whitney had been in correspondence with Catherine Greene, the widow of General Nathaniel Greene, a prominent figure in the Revolutionary War. Catherine recognized Whitney's intelligence and saw in him someone who could help the South's struggling cotton industry. She invited Whitney to Georgia, offering him a place to stay on her plantation and encouraging him to explore the possibility of producing and refining the cotton gin. For Whitney, this invitation was a turning point. It would allow him to witness firsthand the conditions and challenges faced by those cultivating cotton on a large scale. When Whitney arrived in Georgia, he was immediately struck by the size and scope of the cotton plantations. The South was in the midst of an agricultural boom, and cotton was quickly becoming the dominant crop. Yet, despite its importance, the cotton industry was labor-intensive and inefficient. The need for a solution, something that could alleviate the slow and tedious process of separating the cotton fibers from the seeds, was more pressing than ever. Whitney, having already invented the cotton gin, was now seeing firsthand how his creation could change the landscape of Southern agriculture. Whitney's arrival in Georgia marked a pivotal moment in his involvement with the cotton gin. He was not just a distant inventor, he was now directly engaged with the people who would benefit most from his invention. Yet Whitney's experience was not without its challenges. While his invention was seen as a great technological advancement, it was still a novelty to many of the plantation owners, and its true potential was only beginning to be realized. Many plantation owners were skeptical about the efficiency and practicality of the cotton gin, and Whitney found himself needing to persuade them of its value. To further complicate matters, Whitney was soon drawn into the complex and contentious business of patenting and licensing his invention. Though the cotton gin was growing in popularity, it was also quickly being copied by others. Whitney, like many inventors of the time, found it difficult to enforce his patent. As more and more versions of the cotton gin were being built without his consent, Whitney's position grew increasingly precarious. He was forced to balance his work in Georgia, refining the cotton gin and overseeing its production, with the ongoing battle to protect his intellectual property. At the same time, Whitney's move to the South also placed him squarely in the midst of a region that was increasingly reliant on enslaved labor. The vast majority of cotton plantations in Georgia and the surrounding states were worked by enslaved people, and the demand for more labor was intensifying as cotton production surged. The introduction of the cotton gin made the cultivation of cotton more profitable, but it also increased the need for enslaved workers to harvest the cotton. Whitney, who'd come to the South with the hope of contributing to a more efficient agricultural process, found himself confronting the realities of slavery and its deep entrenchment in the Southern economy. Though Whitney had been an abolitionist in his youth, his time in Georgia made him more acutely aware of the complex dynamics between his invention and the system of slavery. His cotton gin, by increasing the efficiency of cotton production, inadvertently contributed to the expansion of slavery in the South. As Whitney witnessed the growth of the cotton economy, he could see how the demand for cotton, and by extension the demand for enslaved labor, was spiraling. While the gin had the potential to improve efficiency, it also strengthened the system that Whitney had once opposed, making it more difficult to reconcile his invention with its unintended consequences. While Whitney was deeply involved in the production and distribution of the cotton gin, his business dealings with Southern planters were marked by both success and frustration. Plantation owners who had initially been skeptical about the machine now began to see its value, and demand for the cotton gin grew exponentially. However, Whitney's struggles with patent enforcement remained a significant issue. As more and more people built unauthorized versions of the gin, Whitney faced an uphill battle to protect his invention and secure his rightful compensation. he found himself caught between the promises of greater production and profit and the challenges of defending his intellectual property in a legal system that was ill-equipped to handle the complexities of such widespread infringement. Despite these difficulties, Whitney remained focused on refining his invention and meeting the growing demand for cotton gins. He oversaw the production of the machines on Catherine Green's plantation, where he continued to make improvements to their design and functionality. His time in the South allowed him to gain invaluable insight into the world of cotton farming, and it was here that he would witness the full scale of the Southern cotton economy in action. Whitney's invention was not only a tool of efficiency, it had become a symbol of the economic power that cotton would come to represent in the South. Over time, Whitney's involvement with the cotton gin transformed him from an inventor into a business person. He navigated the complexities of managing manufacturing, securing patents, and negotiating with plantation owners, all while trying to maintain control over his creation. His relationship with the cotton gin had evolved from a moment of inspiration to a full-fledged enterprise. Yet, as Whitney's role in the cotton gin industry deepened, so too did the ethical dilemmas surrounding its impact on slavery. The invention that had been intended to alleviate human labor had, ironically, played a role in increasing the demand for human labor of a more exploitative nature. Whitney's time in the South was therefore a critical period in both his personal and professional life. It was here that the consequences of his invention truly began to unfold. The widespread use of the cotton gin, which had begun as an exciting new opportunity for the South, became increasingly intertwined with the larger social and political issues of the time. As Whitney's connection to the South deepened, so too did his awareness of the larger forces at play and the role that his invention would come to play in shaping the future of the nation. As the cotton gin continued to gain traction in the South, Eli Whitney found himself at a crossroads. Though his invention had begun to reshape the Southern economy, bringing wealth and prosperity to the region, Whitney's involvement with the cotton gin was far from straightforward. The legal battles over his patent continued to drain his time and resources, and the complexities of intellectual property were beginning to overshadow the financial rewards he had hoped to gain from his invention. Despite the success of the cotton gin, Whitney found himself seeking new challenges and opportunities. In 1798, a major shift in Whitney's career occurred when he was approached by the United States government to fulfill a critical need for the nation: the production of firearms. The War of 1812, which broke out between the United States and Great Britain, had exposed a significant weakness in America's military preparedness. The country's armaments were in short supply, and the U.S. Army was heavily reliant on foreign suppliers for weapons and ammunition. Faced with the urgency of securing a reliable domestic source of firearms, the government turned to Whitney. Whitney's reputation as an inventor had already spread, and despite the challenges with his cotton gin patent, he was seen as a capable manufacturer. In 1798, the U.S. government awarded Whitney a government contract to produce muskets for the military. This contract marked the beginning of a new chapter in Whitney's life, one that would move him away from cotton farming and into the world of arms manufacturing. The U.S. government had a novel idea: to produce firearms using standardized interchangeable parts. At the time, weapons were often made by hand, with each musket being a unique creation. This process was not only inefficient but also costly, as repairs or replacements required custom work. The idea of interchangeable parts, where a part from one musket could fit another, was revolutionary, and Whitney was tasked with bringing this idea to life. The concept of mass production, as it applied to firearms, would be a defining innovation in American manufacturing. Whitney approached the challenge with the same innovative spirit that had driven his creation of the cotton gin. He quickly began assembling the necessary equipment and labor force to produce muskets in the way the government envisioned. His factory, located in New Haven, Connecticut, became the birthplace of a new approach to manufacturing. Whitney was determined to demonstrate that interchangeable parts could not only make the production process more efficient, but could also improve the overall quality and reliability of firearms. The early days of Whitney's arms manufacturing enterprise were fraught with difficulties. Despite his reputation as an inventor, Whitney was faced with significant skepticism and resistance. Many in the military and in manufacturing circles were uncertain whether the concept of interchangeable parts was feasible, let alone practical. At the time, most firearms were still crafted by skilled artisans, each gun made to order by hand. The idea that standard parts could be produced on a large scale and fit together seamlessly was considered at best a distant dream. Nonetheless, Whitney was committed to proving the concept. He designed and built specialized machinery that could produce parts with a high degree of precision. He implemented systematic processes for mass production, where parts were made on assembly lines and workers were trained to perform specific tasks. This division of labor, along with the standardized production techniques, allowed for the rapid creation of identical parts. Over time, this method began to work, and the first muskets produced with interchangeable parts were delivered to the US government. Despite the technical triumphs, Whitney's relationship with the US government was not without its challenges. The contract he had been awarded stipulated that he would be paid only for completed delivered muskets. However, Whitney soon realized that fulfilling the contract would take much longer than he had anticipated. The machinery and techniques he had developed were innovative, but they required time and adjustment. Whitney's factory struggled to meet the production targets set by the government, leading to delays and frustration on both sides. Despite these setbacks, Whitney persisted. The process of producing interchangeable parts was not as simple as it seemed, and the factory's early struggles were a reflection of the larger challenges that accompanied mass production. Eventually, Whitney's arms manufacturing venture proved successful. By the early 19th century, the US government began to receive muskets that were more consistent and reliable than those previously available. The production of standardized firearms using interchangeable parts revolutionized the arms industry and set a precedent for future manufacturing in the United States. Whitney's work laid the foundation for what would become the modern factory system, where mass production and standardized parts would become the norm in industries ranging from automobiles to textiles. While Whitney's involvement in arms manufacturing was pivotal for the country, it was also crucial for his own personal development. The contract with the US government provided Whitney with the financial means to expand his business and cement his status as a leading industrialist. Though his focus had shifted from agriculture to arms, Whitney's experience in manufacturing firearms had a lasting influence on his views about technology, industry, and innovation. The principles of mass production, developed in his firearms factory, would go on to influence industries far beyond the realm of weaponry. Whitney's transition from cotton gin inventor to arms manufacturer also marked a significant turning point in his legacy. He was no longer just an agricultural inventor. He had become a key figure in the rise of American industrialization. His work in arms manufacturing would have lasting effects on the US military and industry. The idea of interchangeable parts, which began with the musket, would spread throughout American manufacturing, reshaping how products were made, how factories were organized, and how industries were structured. While Whitney's arms manufacturing efforts were critical to the nation's preparedness, they also illustrated the broader changes occurring in the early years of the United States. As the country expanded, so too did its industries. Whitney's ability to innovate and adapt to new challenges made him a central figure in the story of America's industrial rise. His work would continue to influence the development of American manufacturing well into the 19th century, as interchangeable parts and mass production would become the bedrock of the country's growing industrial economy. Eli Whitney's involvement with arms manufacturing was not merely a shift in industry. It was a profound leap forward in the way products were made. His work with interchangeable parts would not only change the way weapons were produced, but would also lay the groundwork for future industrial innovations across multiple sectors. In many ways, Whitney's contribution to manufacturing was as significant as his invention of the cotton gin, and it would have a lasting impact on the development of American industry. The idea of interchangeable parts was not entirely new. In fact, the concept had been suggested in various forms before Whitney's time. However, it had not been systematically implemented in manufacturing. What Whitney did was bring the concept to life on a large scale, demonstrating that interchangeable parts could not only work but could revolutionize mass production. Before Whitney, most weapons, including muskets, were made by hand by skilled craftsmen. Each gun was a unique item, and parts from one musket were not guaranteed to fit another. If a musket broke or needed to be repaired, the process was time-consuming and costly. Craftsmen had to create custom parts for every weapon, which often led to inefficiency and a lack of uniformity in the arms supply. The government's contract with Whitney in 1798, requesting muskets for the military, came at a time when the United States was still a young nation with limited manufacturing capacity. The War of 1812, which had exposed the vulnerabilities of the US in terms of weaponry, underscored the importance of having a reliable domestic source of arms. Whitney recognized this need and set out to address it by developing a system of mass production in which parts were standardized and could be easily swapped between different muskets. The process Whitney developed was based on precision and uniformity. He introduced a new division of labor in his factory, where workers specialized in making specific parts. Each worker would focus on producing a particular component, and by organizing the production line in this way, Whitney was able to maintain a high level of consistency across the parts being made. This innovation reduced the time and labor required to produce muskets, and, for the first time, made it possible to produce large quantities of weapons quickly and efficiently. One of the critical aspects of Whitney's work was his use of specialized machinery. While many of the tools he used were still relatively rudimentary by modern standards, they were cutting edge for their time. Whitney invested in machinery that could create parts with a high degree of precision. These machines allowed parts to be produced in large quantities, and because they were standardized, they could be interchanged between different weapons. This development represented a major departure from the traditional craft-based methods of production that had been common for centuries. Whitney's factory in New Haven became the heart of this new manufacturing process. It was here that his vision of interchangeable parts truly came to life. The factory employed skilled machinists and laborers who were trained to work with precision tools. They produced parts that were consistent, reliable, and could be easily assembled into complete muskets. This standardization of parts made it possible for the US government to receive large numbers of muskets that were all virtually identical in quality and function. Though Whitney's work with interchangeable parts was initially focused on firearms, its impact extended far beyond the arms industry. The principles of mass production and standardized parts that Whitney pioneered would go on to influence other industries, including textiles, agriculture, and manufacturing. As the Industrial Revolution gained momentum in the United States, Whitney's innovations helped to shape the way goods were produced, and his ideas would serve as the foundation for future advancements in manufacturing. The significance of Whitney's work with interchangeable parts cannot be overstated. In many ways, it marked the beginning of a new era in American industry. Prior to Whitney's innovations, manufacturing in the US was slow, inefficient, and dependent on individual craftsmanship. The introduction of interchangeable parts helped to streamline production, reduce costs, and increase the overall efficiency of the manufacturing process. Whitney's success with interchangeable parts also had a profound effect on the US economy. By making manufacturing more efficient, it helped to stimulate economic growth and create jobs. It also allowed the United States to become more self-sufficient, reducing its reliance on foreign imports. In particular, Whitney's work in the arms industry helped to establish the United States as a growing industrial power, capable of producing its own weapons for defense and export. However, Whitney's achievement was not without challenges. The concept of interchangeable parts was not universally accepted, and there were many in the manufacturing world who were skeptical of its feasibility. Some believed that the process would be too costly, while others doubted that machines could ever produce parts with the level of precision required for mass production. Whitney faced resistance not only from manufacturers, but also from some members of the US government, who were initially hesitant to invest in the large-scale production of standardized weapons. Despite these challenges, Whitney persisted in his efforts, and his success became a powerful testament to the potential of interchangeable parts. By the early 1800s, the US government had placed additional orders for muskets, and Whitney's factory had become the primary supplier of firearms for the military. His work laid the foundation for the development of a modern industrial economy in the United States, where mass production and standardized parts would become the standard for manufacturing. Whitney's work with interchangeable parts also had a profound impact on the labor force. The division of labor and specialization that he introduced in his factory became a model for other industries. By breaking down complex processes into smaller, repetitive tasks, Whitney was able to increase productivity and reduce costs. This approach would go on to influence the development of assembly lines in the automotive industry and other forms of mass production that would characterize the 20th century. In many ways, Whitney's system of interchangeable parts was as groundbreaking as his invention of the cotton gin. While the cotton gin revolutionized agriculture and the South's economy, interchangeable parts revolutionized American manufacturing, laying the foundation for the country's industrial future. Eli Whitney's success in introducing interchangeable parts was an extraordinary achievement that would lay the foundation for modern industrial production. Yet, his journey was far from smooth. The transition from small-scale artisanal manufacturing to large-scale mass production of muskets was fraught with challenges. Despite his pioneering work, Whitney encountered significant obstacles in fulfilling his government contract and demonstrating the practicality of his vision. These setbacks tested his patience, resolve, and ability to innovate under pressure. Whitney's contract with the US government in 1798 was a pivotal moment in his life. The government had tasked him with producing a significant number of muskets to supply the military during a time of heightened tensions, particularly with Great Britain. Whitney's task was to create muskets that would not only meet the military's needs, but would also be uniform and reliable. No small feat given the state of American manufacturing at the time. At the outset, Whitney was confident in his ability to meet the government's demands. His system of interchangeable parts, which he had developed for the production of firearms, promised to revolutionize the arms industry. No longer would each musket be a unique handcrafted item requiring custom-made parts. Instead, parts could be standardized and mass-produced, reducing both production time and cost. Whitney believed that his system would allow him to fulfill the contract efficiently and at scale. However, reality soon set in. While the concept of interchangeable parts was theoretically sound, its application was far more difficult than Whitney had anticipated. The precision required to create perfectly standardized parts on a mass scale was a challenge that Whitney's factory had yet to fully overcome. The machinery, though groundbreaking for its time, was not yet capable of producing the level of consistency needed to meet the government standards. As the years passed, Whitney found himself struggling to meet the contract's requirements. The production of muskets was slow, and the quality of the parts varied. Each musket required hundreds of individual pieces, all of which needed to fit together perfectly. Despite the workers' skill and the specialized machinery Whitney had introduced, the factory could not yet achieve the precise level of uniformity that was necessary for mass production. These early setbacks were not only frustrating for Whitney, but they also led to financial strain. Whitney had invested heavily in the development of his factory and machinery, but the slow pace of production meant that he was not meeting his contractual obligations. The government was growing impatient, and Whitney's reputation as an industrial innovator was on the line. In addition to the challenges of mass production, Whitney was also dealing with the complexities of managing a growing business and navigating the demands of the US government. To make matters worse, Whitney faced significant skepticism from military officials and manufacturers who doubted the feasibility of interchangeable parts. Many believed that mass production could never achieve the level of precision that Whitney was promising, and they criticized his work as impractical. Some even suggested that the idea of interchangeable parts was little more than a theoretical ideal, something that could never be successfully implemented on a large scale. Despite these challenges, Whitney remained determined. He continued to refine his methods, making adjustments to both the machinery and the production process. He increased the number of workers and expanded his factory in New Haven. Whitney's factory became a proving ground for his vision, with each failure becoming an opportunity to improve his system. Over time, the precision of the parts improved, and production began to accelerate. One of the key innovations Whitney introduced during this period was the division of labor. Instead of having each worker build an entire musket from start to finish, Whitney implemented a system in which workers specialized in producing specific parts. This division of labor allowed the factory to operate more efficiently, as workers became highly skilled at producing one component of the musket. As a result, the overall production process became faster, and the quality of the parts improved. By 1812, after years of struggle, Whitney's factory had begun to meet the demands of the government contract. The muskets produced were of consistent quality, and parts were interchangeable. The factory had reached a level of efficiency that made it capable of fulfilling large orders. While the process was far from perfect, Whitney had demonstrated that interchangeable parts were not only possible, but could also be produced on a large scale. However, Whitney's battle was not over. The US, government still dissatisfied with the slow pace of production, sought to impose penalties on Whitney for not meeting the original production deadlines. Whitney, in turn, demanded that the government honor the terms of the contract and pay him for the work he had completed. After several years of negotiation and legal battles, Whitney was finally able to secure full payment for his work, as well as a new contract for the continued production of muskets. Despite the difficulties he faced, Whitney's perseverance ultimately paid off. The success of his arms manufacturing venture marked a major turning point, not only in his career, but also in American industrial history. His work in mass production and interchangeable parts would become a model for future manufacturing efforts, and his ideas would influence countless industries in the years to come. Whitney's success in arms manufacturing, though hard-earned, had broader implications for American industry. His innovations in mass production and the use of interchangeable parts set the stage for the growth of the manufacturing sector in the United States. His factory in New Haven became one of the first examples of large-scale industrial production in the country, and his system of interchangeable parts would later be applied to a variety of industries, from textiles to automobiles. Through his perseverance and ingenuity, Whitney overcame the significant challenges that had initially threatened to derail his arms manufacturing venture. The muskets he produced for the US military would play a vital role in the country's defense during the War of 1812, and his innovations would lay the groundwork for the rapid industrialization that would follow in the decades to come. After Eli Whitney's breakthrough with the cotton gin and his subsequent innovations in arms manufacturing, his reputation as an inventor and industrialist grew rapidly. While his work with firearms and cotton had already made him an influential figure in American industry, Whitney's entrepreneurial spirit led him to seek out additional business ventures. His drive for innovation, along with his growing success, spurred him to diversify his investments and explore other industries, further cementing his place in the history of American industrialization. One of the most significant ventures Whitney became involved with was the manufacturing of firearms outside the government contracts. With the success of his system of interchangeable parts, he saw an opportunity to expand his arms manufacturing efforts into private industry. By the early 1800s, Whitney had begun supplying firearms not only to the US government but also to private buyers. His factory in New Haven had established a reputation for producing reliable and standardized weapons, and there was a growing demand for these arms in both domestic and foreign markets. Whitney was also involved in the expansion of other manufacturing businesses, including textiles. With his understanding of mass production and standardized parts, Whitney saw the potential for applying his principles to the rapidly growing textile industry in the United States. By the turn of the 19th century, the textile industry was booming in the North, with cotton mills in New England and elsewhere requiring an increasing supply of machinery and standardized equipment. Whitney's background in manufacturing made him well positioned to meet this demand. In 1818, Whitney became a key figure in the establishment of a textile mill in Massachusetts. He had acquired a stake in the mill and helped design machinery to improve the production of cotton textiles. Whitney's involvement with the textile industry reflected his broader vision for American manufacturing. The use of interchangeable parts to streamline production and increase efficiency across various industries. His work in the textile sector would ultimately contribute to the rise of industrial manufacturing in the United States, as his innovations influenced the design and operation of factories across the country. Alongside these ventures, Whitney was also drawn to opportunities in mining and agriculture. In the early 1800s, he invested in a large plantation in the South, further expanding his business interests. This investment, however, was more complicated given the increasing dependence of the South on slavery, as the cotton gin had contributed to the expansion of the cotton economy. Whitney, who had originally sought to improve productivity through his invention, found himself in a moral dilemma. Despite his success in revolutionizing the cotton industry, the profits generated from his plantation were intrinsically tied to the continuation of slavery, a system that Whitney himself had opposed in his youth. As his business ventures grew, Whitney was able to accumulate significant wealth. But this wealth came with the growing tension between the North and South, as well as the deepening moral and political implications of his involvement in the cotton economy. While his innovations were fueling the rise of American industry, they were also entrenching a system of labor exploitation in the South. This complex reality marked a turning point for Whitney's career. As a businessman and industrialist, he was a symbol of progress and modernity, but as the owner of land in the South, he was tied to a system that would later become a catalyst for conflict in the United States. In addition to his ventures in manufacturing and agriculture, Whitney was also an active participant in the growing transportation sector. By the 1820s, the expansion of railroads was transforming the United States, and Whitney saw this as another opportunity to diversify his investments. Railroads were rapidly becoming a major force in the nation's economy, and Whitney was able to apply his understanding of mass production and efficient manufacturing to the development of railroad equipment, including engines and track components. His ventures in transportation reflected his growing understanding of the interconnectedness of different industries. Whitney recognized that the success of one sector depended on the growth and expansion of others, His investments in transportation, agriculture, and manufacturing were not isolated efforts, but part of a larger vision for a more industrialized and interconnected nation. As the United States began to transition from an agrarian economy to an industrial powerhouse, Whitney's business ventures became emblematic of the country's economic transformation. Despite the many successes Whitney achieved in these various industries, he was not without his critics. His focus on profits and his willingness to engage in industries tied to slavery drew scrutiny, particularly from those in the North who were increasingly vocal in their opposition to the practice. Whitney's role in the expansion of the cotton economy, despite his personal opposition to slavery, complicated his legacy. Though he had played a key role in shaping American industry, his involvement in the plantation economy and the systems of exploitation it relied upon continued to raise difficult questions about the nature of his success. Yet Whitney's contributions to American industrialization cannot be denied. His innovations in mass production and interchangeable parts helped lay the foundation for modern manufacturing. His involvement in the textile and transportation industries influenced the growth of the United States industrial infrastructure. Even as his business ventures expanded into new areas, his underlying vision of a connected, efficient, and technologically advanced economy remained central to his efforts. Whitney's diverse business ventures reflected the breadth of his entrepreneurial spirit. From firearms to textiles, railroads to agriculture, he was a pivotal figure in the early days of American industrialization. His ability to navigate different industries and apply his principles of efficiency and mass production allowed him to have a lasting influence on the country's economic development. Though his legacy is complicated by his entanglement with slavery, his impact on the nation's industrial progress remains undeniable. As Eli Whitney's work progressed through the late 18th and early 19th centuries, the political and social landscape of the United States was undergoing a series of profound changes. The country, still in its infancy, was navigating the complexities of establishing a new government, defining its national identity, and grappling with issues that would eventually shape its future. Whitney's inventions and business ventures unfolded within this broader context, and the era's political dynamics played a significant role in both his achievements and the challenges he faced. At the time Whitney was making his mark as an inventor and industrialist, the United States was still a young and fragile nation. The American Revolution had only recently ended, and the country was working to establish itself as a unified republic. The new U.S. Constitution had been ratified in 1787, but the fledgling government was still finding its footing. The political climate was one of experimentation, with debates over states' rights, federal power, and the role of the government in the economy becoming central to American discourse. These debates were particularly relevant to Whitney, who found himself navigating a rapidly changing world in which his innovations were both a symbol of progress and a reflection of the tensions inherent in American society. One of the most defining aspects of this era was the growing divide between the North and South, a divide that would become more pronounced as the country moved toward the Civil War. In the South, the expansion of cotton production, fueled by Whitney's invention of the cotton gin, was having a profound impact on the region's economy and social structure. The cotton gin made cotton farming far more profitable, which led to the expansion of large plantations. This expansion, in turn, fueled the demand for enslaved labor, and slavery became further entrenched in the Southern economy. Whitney's invention, though designed to improve efficiency, contributed to the intensification of the very system he had once opposed. This growing reliance on slavery in the South was in direct contrast to the industrializing North, where manufacturing, trade, and transportation were beginning to take center stage. The northern states were becoming more urbanized, with factories, railroads, and infrastructure projects transforming the economy. The North, in many ways, was embracing the modern era of industry. driven in part by innovations like Whitney's interchangeable parts. In this sense, Whitney's contributions were part of a larger movement toward industrialization in the United States. Yet the social and economic systems in place were deeply divided by the issue of slavery. Politically, the United States was also experiencing significant tension. The country was trying to define itself in the world, navigating foreign relations with Europe, particularly Britain and France, while also dealing with internal disputes over the role of government in regulating trade, business, and manufacturing. Whitney's efforts to create a standardized system of production were happening in the context of a government that was still experimenting with how to balance power between the federal government and the states. His work with arms manufacturing, for example, was influenced by the growing desire for military self-sufficiency, especially after the War of 1812, during which the United States had been forced to rely on foreign arms suppliers. Whitney's experience with the US government's contract to produce muskets also highlighted the growing role of the federal government in shaping the nation's economy. The federal government, recognizing the importance of having a reliable supply of weapons, sought to invest in domestic manufacturing. Whitney's work with interchangeable parts was seen as a solution to this problem, and his successful fulfillment of the government contract set a precedent for future government involvement in industrial production. This period marked the beginning of a new understanding of the government's role in supporting and regulating industry, a concept that would continue to evolve throughout the 19th and 20th centuries. The social fabric of the nation was also changing as Whitney's inventions helped to shape the course of the Industrial Revolution in the United States. The rise of factories, railroads, and mass production created new social dynamics, particularly in the North. As industrial centers grew, so did the need for factory labor. While the Southern economy continued to rely heavily on agricultural labor, the North saw the rise of wage labor, with men, women, and children working long hours in factories to produce goods for both domestic and international markets. At the same time, this era was marked by increasing class divisions and questions about labor rights. The industrializing economy of the North, while providing new opportunities for some, also led to poor working conditions and exploitation for many factory workers. The rise of factory-based manufacturing, driven by innovations like Whitney's interchangeable parts, created a new class of industrial workers whose lives were often characterized by long hours, low wages, and harsh working conditions. These realities would later fuel labor movements and calls for workers' rights, adding another layer of complexity to the social and political landscape of the United States. In the South, the growing dependence on slavery was increasingly at odds with the developing abolitionist movement in the North. As Whitney's cotton gin accelerated the expansion of slavery, the moral and political divide between the North and South deepened. The economic prosperity of the South, driven by the profitability of cotton, was built on a foundation of human exploitation. This contradiction would ultimately lead to irreconcilable differences between the two regions, culminating in the Civil War. Whitney, for his part, was caught in the middle of these tensions. On the one hand, his cotton gin had revolutionized agriculture in the South, but on the other, his work with interchangeable parts had helped lay the groundwork for the industrial economy of the North. Whitney's life and legacy reflect the complexities of this era, an era of innovation, but also an era of deepening divisions over issues of labor, slavery, and the role of government. Though Whitney's work contributed to the industrialization of the United States, his legacy cannot be separated from the political and social context in which it occurred. The rise of manufacturing, fueled by innovations like the cotton gin and interchangeable parts, set the stage for the rapid industrial growth of the United States, but also highlighted the moral and political challenges that would come to define the nation's history in the years leading up to the Civil War. Eli Whitney's role in shaping American industry is often viewed through the lens of his two most notable inventions, the cotton gin and the system of interchangeable parts for firearms. Both of these innovations had profound effects on the country's economic development and industrial growth, leaving a legacy that would continue to influence American manufacturing for generations. Whitney's introduction of interchangeable parts in arms manufacturing was groundbreaking, but its broader significance extended far beyond the military industry. By standardizing production, Whitney not only made firearms more reliable and cost-effective, but also set the stage for mass production techniques that would eventually define the American industrial landscape. His methods of organizing labor and machinery within a factory system introduced principles that would become staples of industrial manufacturing. Before Whitney's innovations, the concept of mass production was virtually non-existent in the United States. Products were made by hand, and the labor-intensive process meant that each item was unique. The introduction of interchangeable parts radically changed this approach. Whitney's factory in New Haven, Connecticut, was one of the first to utilize a division of labor where different workers specialized in creating specific components for muskets. This shift made mass production of identical items not only possible but efficient, dramatically reducing costs and production time. The impact of this system of manufacturing extended far beyond muskets. Whitney's work with interchangeable parts paved the way for other industries to adopt similar methods. The textile industry, the railroad industry, and eventually the automobile industry all benefited from the principles Whitney helped to develop. The mass production model he pioneered would become a key feature of industrial growth in the United States, influencing manufacturing processes that allowed industries to scale and meet growing demand. Whitney's contributions were also significant in terms of how they interacted with the broader industrialization of the United States. While the North was rapidly industrializing with its burgeoning textile mills and factories, the South's economy was largely agricultural, dependent on crops like tobacco, rice, and cotton. The cotton gin, another of Whitney's innovations, revolutionized the Southern agricultural landscape. It allowed for the mass production of cotton, which became the backbone of the South's economy. But Whitney's cotton gin did more than transform agriculture. It created an economic link between the industrializing North and the agricultural South. The North's textile mills were soon dependent on the cheap cotton produced in the South. This interdependence, while contributing to the growth of both regions, also helped to entrench the system of slavery in the South, as the demand for cotton led to the expansion of plantations and the increased reliance on enslaved labor. This complex relationship between the North's industrial economy and the South's agricultural economy would become one of the defining features of American history in the decades leading up to the Civil War. Whitney's dual legacy as both an industrial innovator and an unwitting contributor to the system of slavery in the South is part of the complicated history of American industry. While he can be credited with helping to propel the United States into the modern industrial age, his inventions also had unintended consequences that would reverberate throughout the nation. His cotton gin, which initially sought to improve efficiency in cotton production, became a tool that ultimately deepened the nation's divisions over slavery. Despite these complexities, Whitney's role in American industry cannot be overstated. His system of mass production influenced a wide range of industries, from firearms to textiles to the burgeoning railroad industry. The standardization of parts and the use of division of labor were key innovations that allowed for the mass production of goods, a model that would continue to evolve throughout the 19th and 20th centuries. Beyond manufacturing, Whitney's work also had a lasting impact on the broader concept of innovation. His ability to take an idea, whether for improving cotton production or revolutionizing firearm manufacturing, and turn it into a practical solution for widespread use, set him apart as one of the first truly American inventors. Whitney's legacy is a testament to the ingenuity and adaptability that characterized the early years of the United States, as the nation shifted from an agrarian economy to an industrial one. Whitney's influence extended even further as his manufacturing techniques were adopted and refined by others. His principles of interchangeable parts and mass production laid the groundwork for future industrial giants like Henry Ford, whose assembly line revolutionized the automobile industry in the early 20th century. Ford's success in mass-producing cars relied heavily on the ideas of standardized parts and assembly line production that Whitney had pioneered a century earlier. While Whitney may not have achieved the fame of later industrial magnates, his contributions were foundational to the growth of American industry. His vision of a more efficient and standardized method of production helped to transform not only the manufacturing sector, but also the way Americans thought about work, industry, and innovation. His work in arms manufacturing, textile production, and agriculture provided the blueprint for many of the industries that would shape the American economy in the years to come. In the broader context of the nation's development, Whitney's legacy as an industrialist reflects the transition from small-scale, craft-based production to the factory-based system that would dominate the United States by the late 19th century. His ideas about efficiency and standardization would be embraced and expanded upon as the country entered the full swing of industrialization. Whitney's work helped to create the foundation for what would become one of the most powerful industrial economies in the world. Yet, as with many historical figures, Whitney's legacy is not without its contradictions. His innovations, which were instrumental in the rise of industrial America, were also tied to the perpetuation of the slave economy in the South. The success of the cotton gin and the expansion of cotton plantations, driven by the efficiency of Whitney's invention, were directly linked to the deepening entrenchment of slavery. This paradox, where innovation and progress coexisted with exploitation and moral questions, remains a key aspect of Whitney's complex legacy. As Eli Whitney entered the later years of his life, he found himself reflecting on the profound changes he had helped to shape in the United States. By the time of his death in 1825, Whitney had become one of the nation's most well-known and influential inventors. Yet his life and legacy were more complicated than simple recognition and success. His reflections in his later years reveal a man who had witnessed the transformation of an entire nation through his innovations, but who was also deeply aware of the unintended consequences of those same innovations. Whitney had always been driven by a desire to improve the world around him, to make a tangible difference through invention and industry. His inventions, the cotton gin and the system of interchangeable parts, had reshaped the American economy, propelled the rise of industrial manufacturing, and contributed to the expansion of slavery in the South. As he grew older, Whitney came to realize that the consequences of his work were far-reaching and in some cases morally ambiguous. The years following Whitney's success with the cotton gin and arms manufacturing were marked by both personal and professional challenges. Despite his early setbacks in protecting his patents and dealing with legal battles, Whitney had managed to establish a successful industrial empire. He had expanded his business interests, particularly in arms manufacturing and textiles, and became one of the wealthiest men in the United States. However, the profits and prestige that came with his business ventures were accompanied by a growing sense of unease about the moral implications of his contributions to the Southern economy. Whitney's involvement in the cotton industry was at times a source of personal conflict. The cotton gin, which had revolutionized the South's agricultural production, also intensified the region's reliance on slavery. While Whitney had initially created the cotton gin to make cotton farming more efficient, the unintended consequence was that it fueled the expansion of the slave economy. In his later years, Whitney recognized this paradox. His invention, which had been hailed as an innovation of great promise, had also become a catalyst for the deepening entrenchment of slavery in the Southern states. This realization weighed heavily on him, particularly as the debate over slavery became more divisive in the years leading up to the Civil War. Whitney's reflections on slavery were shaped by his early opposition to the practice. He'd come from a New England background where abolitionist sentiment was growing, and had once viewed himself as an advocate for the gradual abolition of slavery. Yet, as the cotton gin became the driving force behind the expansion of slavery in the South, Whitney found himself at a crossroads. His invention has been instrumental in increasing cotton production, which in turn had made slavery more economically viable and widespread. Whitney was forced to confront the fact that his most famous invention was inextricably linked to the very system of exploitation he had once opposed. In his later years, Whitney also reflected on the broader impact of his work on American industry. His system of interchangeable parts had revolutionized the production of firearms, but its influence had spread far beyond that. By the time Whitney was in his 50s and 60s, the principles of mass production and standardization that he had introduced were becoming central to American manufacturing. Whitney had pioneered methods that would shape the future of industry not only in the United States but also around the world. The efficiency he had introduced in arms manufacturing became the model for other industries, from textiles to transportation. The factory-based production system, in which interchangeable parts were used to create uniform products, became the foundation for modern industrial economies. Despite the widespread success of his inventions and the lasting impact he had on American industry, Whitney's later years were not free of struggle. His legal battles over patent infringement continued to occupy much of his time, as other manufacturers and inventors sought to build on his ideas without compensating him for his work. These battles were not only financially draining but also emotionally taxing for Whitney, who had come to feel that his intellectual property was too easily undermined. His desire to protect his creations and ensure that inventors were fairly compensated for their work was a central concern throughout his life. But it was in his later years that he began to see how the country's legal system and its treatment of patents was still evolving. In his reflections, Whitney also expressed a sense of ambivalence about the direction of the country. The United States was becoming more industrialized, and while this was a source of pride for many, it was also clear to Whitney that the country's growing economic power was not without its costs. The rapid industrialization of the North was matched by the deepening divide between the North and South over slavery, and Whitney was painfully aware of how his innovations had contributed to this divide. His work in arms manufacturing and the textile industry had bolstered the North's industrial economy, while the cotton gin had given the South an economic advantage built on the labor of enslaved people. Whitney's reflections on his legacy were undoubtedly shaped by the political and moral climate of his later years. As the nation moved closer to the Civil War, the contradictions within American society were becoming more pronounced. The very innovations that had helped make the United States a powerful industrial nation were tied to systems of exploitation and inequality. Whitney's legacy, therefore, was complex, a mixture of industrial progress and moral compromise. Despite the moral and political complexities of his work, Whitney remained proud of his contributions to American industry. He saw himself as an innovator who had helped to lay the groundwork for a prosperous modern nation. He was deeply committed to the idea that invention and industry could drive progress and improve society. Yet, in his later years, he also recognized that progress often came with unintended consequences, and that the path to innovation was not always a straight line. Whitney passed away in 1825 at the age of 59, leaving behind a legacy that would continue to shape American industry long after his death. His work in arms manufacturing and his development of interchangeable parts had changed the face of American manufacturing, and his cotton gin had played a central role in shaping the economy of the South. Whitney's life and career were marked by his determination, his innovative spirit, and his willingness to push the boundaries of what was possible. Yet, as he reflected on his achievements in his later years, he was also confronted by the moral complexities of his work and its unintended consequences. Whitney's invention of the cotton gin in 1793 was a watershed moment in the history of the United States. At first glance, it appeared to be a straightforward solution to a practical problem: the laborious task of separating cotton fibers from seeds. However, its effects were far-reaching and complex, touching not only the economy but also the moral and political fabric of the nation. The cotton gin's legacy is intertwined with the rapid expansion of the cotton industry, the intensification of slavery, and the broader transformation of American society. At the time of its invention, cotton was a valuable crop, but its cultivation was labor-intensive. The process of separating the seeds from the cotton fibers was slow and required a significant amount of manual labor. Whitney's cotton gin revolutionized this process by enabling a single worker to process up to 50 pounds of cotton per day, far more than could be done by hand. With this dramatic increase in productivity, the gin opened up new possibilities for cotton farming, making it economically viable on a much larger scale. The immediate effect of the cotton gin was to propel cotton to the forefront of the Southern economy. Before the invention, cotton was grown on a small scale, alongside other crops like tobacco, rice, and indigo. However, with the efficiency the gin provided, cotton quickly became the dominant cash crop of the South. Plantations expanded, and the demand for cotton skyrocketed, particularly in the textile mills of the North and in Europe. The cotton gin made it possible for the South to meet this demand, and by the early 19th century, cotton had become the backbone of the Southern economy. But the benefits of the cotton gin were not confined to the economic realm. The machine also had profound social and political consequences, some of which Whitney may not have foreseen. The rapid growth of cotton cultivation, fueled by the efficiency of the cotton gin, led to a corresponding demand for labor, and that labor, in the South, came from enslaved people. As cotton became more profitable, the demand for enslaved labor increased. The cotton gin did not eliminate the need for human labor, it simply made it more efficient. Enslaved people were forced to work in the cotton fields, and the increased production of cotton required even more workers. The cotton gin, in a sense, revitalized the institution of slavery, which had already existed in the South but had been on the decline. Whitney's invention made slavery even more entrenched in the Southern economy, as plantation owners sought to expand their operations and maximize their profits. This connection between the cotton gin and the expansion of slavery would have profound implications for the United States. While the North was increasingly industrializing, the South remained largely agrarian, and the prosperity of the Southern economy was built on the forced labor of enslaved people. The cotton gin, by making cotton farming more profitable, deepened the South's reliance on slavery. As a result, the divide between the North and South grew wider, as the two regions developed distinct economies, social structures, and ultimately political identities. The legacy of the cotton gin was also felt in the broader scope of American history. As the United States moved toward the Civil War, the question of slavery became one of the central issues that divided the nation. While the North increasingly embraced industrialization, the South's economy became more deeply tied to the labor-intensive cultivation of cotton. The cotton gin, which had been intended to increase productivity and efficiency, had inadvertently contributed to the entrenchment of an exploitative and brutal system of labor that would persist for decades. Whitney, for his part, was not blind to the moral implications of his invention. Though he had created the cotton gin to make cotton farming more efficient, he could not have predicted the extent to which it would fuel the expansion of slavery. Whitney's invention made the South's economy more reliant on cotton, but it also made the institution of slavery more entrenched. The gin's success contributed to the growth of the cotton kingdom and the expansion of slavery to new regions, a process that would become central to the conflicts leading up to the Civil War. Even as the cotton gin played a role in the prosperity of the South, it also served to highlight the moral contradictions of the nation. The machine's ability to process cotton so efficiently made it possible to produce vast quantities of the crop, but it also deepened the reliance on enslaved labor. While Whitney's invention revolutionized the agricultural industry and contributed to the economic success of the South, it also made slavery a more integral part of the nation's economic and political landscape. In addition to its impact on slavery, the cotton gin also left a lasting mark on the global economy. As cotton production soared in the United States, the demand for American cotton increased not only domestically, but also internationally. The textile mills of Great Britain, which were driving the Industrial Revolution, relied heavily on southern cotton. The global trade in cotton, fueled by the efficiency of the cotton gin, made the United States a key player in the world economy. The cotton gin, in this sense, contributed to the United States' rise as an industrial power, even as it entrenched the system of slavery. The cotton gin's legacy, then, is complex and multifaceted. It played a key role in the growth of the Southern economy, the expansion of slavery, and the development of the global cotton trade. But it also served as a reminder of the tensions that lay at the heart of the American experiment. Tensions between progress and exploitation, between industry and human rights. Whitney's invention, which was celebrated for its ingenuity, became a symbol of the contradictions that defined the nation's development. In the years to come, the cotton gin's legacy would continue to reverberate. As the country grappled with the moral and political ramifications of its industrial success. Despite its dark associations with slavery, the cotton gin remains one of the most important inventions in American history. It transformed agriculture, reshaped the economy, and played a central role in the development of the United States as an industrial power. Yet it is also a reminder of the price of progress and the ways in which technology can shape and be shaped by the social and moral currents of its time. Throughout his career, Eli Whitney faced numerous challenges, not just in terms of technological innovation, but in navigating the complicated world of patent law. While the cotton gin and his work with interchangeable parts revolutionized American industry, Whitney's struggle to protect his intellectual property remains a defining aspect of his legacy. These challenges highlight the nascent nature of the American patent system and the difficulties inventors faced in ensuring their inventions were properly protected. Whitney's first major encounter with the patent system came shortly after he developed the cotton gin in 1793. At the time, the patent laws in the United States were still in their infancy, and there was little clarity about how to enforce intellectual property rights. Whitney, eager to protect his invention and the time and resources he had invested, was granted a patent for the cotton gin in 1794. But the process of securing and maintaining this patent proved far more complicated than he had anticipated. One of the main obstacles Whitney faced was the widespread infringement of his patent. The cotton gin, though revolutionary, was a simple enough concept that it could be replicated with relatively minimal adjustments. Soon after the gin began to make an impact on cotton production, Whitney found that many plantation owners and manufacturers in the South had begun to build their own versions of the machine without paying him for his invention. This unauthorized copying undermined Whitney's ability to profit from the cotton gin, and he was forced to take legal action to protect his intellectual property. At the time, patent law in the United States was underdeveloped. The U.S. Patent Office, established in 1790, was still a young institution, and the legal framework for enforcing patents was weak. Whitney's patent for the cotton gin was, in theory, a legal protection for his invention, but the enforcement of that protection was another matter entirely. The legal process was slow, and courts were often reluctant to side with individual inventors over large, powerful interests, such as the wealthy plantation owners who had a vested interest in avoiding payment for the gin. Whitney spent years in legal battles to assert his patent rights, but the process was far from straightforward. The first major challenge came from the widespread use of the gin in the South. As more and more cotton plantations adopted the gin, Whitney's patent became a point of contention. Many of the plantation owners, eager to avoid paying for the machine, began producing their own versions of the gin, arguing that the design was too simple to warrant patent protection. Whitney found himself in a difficult position, as enforcing his patent meant taking legal action against powerful and influential individuals, many of whom had the resources to resist. In addition to the difficulties of enforcement, Whitney also faced legal challenges from competitors who claimed to have independently developed similar designs. These competing inventors argued that they too had created a machine that could separate cotton from its seeds, and that Whitney's patent was invalid because the idea was not original. As a result, Whitney had to engage in multiple legal proceedings to prove that he was the true inventor of the cotton gin, and to secure the financial compensation he believed he was owed. The prolonged legal battles were financially draining and emotionally exhausting. The costs of litigation were high, and Whitney was forced to use much of the revenue from his cotton gin sales to fund his efforts to protect his intellectual property. For many inventors of the time, the legal system offered little protection against patent infringement. Whitney's experience was emblematic of the struggles that inventors often faced when trying to secure their rights, in an era when intellectual property law was still evolving. Despite these challenges, Whitney's persistence ultimately paid off. After years of legal wrangling, he was able to secure the enforcement of his patent. In 1807, a landmark decision by the courts upheld his patent for the cotton gin, and Whitney was granted compensation for the infringement of his intellectual property. This victory was not just a financial one for Whitney. It was also a crucial moment in the history of intellectual property rights in the United States. Whitney's success in defending his patent set a precedent for future inventors, helping to establish the importance of protecting intellectual property and ensuring that inventors could benefit from their innovations. However, even after this legal victory, the issue of patent infringement did not entirely disappear. Whitney continued to face challenges from those who sought to bypass his patent, and the cotton gin's widespread use meant that enforcing the patent across the South remained an ongoing struggle. But Whitney's determination to protect his invention played a key role in shaping the development of patent law in the United States, highlighting the need for stronger protections for inventors and clearer mechanisms for enforcing patents. Whitney's difficulties with the patent system also shed light on the broader challenges that inventors faced in the early years of the American Republic. The United States was still a young nation, and its legal and economic systems were in the process of development. The country was navigating the balance between fostering innovation and protecting the interests of powerful industrial and agricultural interests. Whitney's experience with patent law reflected the broader tensions of the time, as inventors sought to secure their intellectual property, while large-scale industries and wealthy landowners sought to maintain their profits without regard to patent protections. Ultimately, Whitney's battle with the patent system served as a crucial turning point in the development of American intellectual property law. His struggles highlighted the need for a more robust and clearly defined system of patent protection, one that would safeguard the rights of inventors and ensure that innovation could be properly rewarded. Whitney's persistence in defending his cotton gin patent helped to lay the foundation for future patent law in the United States, and set the stage for a more sophisticated understanding of intellectual property rights. Whitney's experience also contributed to the broader narrative of American innovation. The difficulties he faced in protecting his inventions underscored the challenges of fostering creativity and entrepreneurship in a rapidly changing society. Whitney's legacy is not only that of an inventor, but also that of a figure who helped to shape the legal and economic landscape that would allow future generations of inventors to thrive. By the time Eli Whitney entered his later years, he'd become a household name in the United States. His inventions, the cotton gin and the system of interchangeable parts, had transformed the American economy, but they had also shaped his own identity and legacy in ways that were both celebrated and contested. Whitney's public recognition grew throughout his life, and while he was widely acknowledged as one of the nation's most important inventors, the full extent of his contributions, particularly their unintended social consequences, remained a source of complex reflection. In the early years following his invention of the cotton gin, Whitney was not an immediate celebrity. While the gin had a profound impact on the South and the global cotton trade, Whitney's role as its inventor was often overlooked or downplayed. The cotton gin's simplicity, once the design were understood, led many to dismiss it as a minor innovation. Furthermore, Whitney's difficulties in protecting his patent and his struggle with patent infringement meant that much of the financial reward from the gin's success eluded him for many years. As the cotton gin's success grew and spread across the South, however, Whitney's name began to be associated with industrial progress and invention. As the gin became central to the Southern economy, particularly in cotton-producing states like Georgia and South Carolina, Whitney's invention gained recognition, and his name was widely known. By the early 19th century, Whitney was acknowledged as an inventor of great significance. Though his public recognition was often tied to the economic boom in the South and the unintended consequences of his invention, namely its role in perpetuating slavery, Whitney's fame reached new heights when he became involved in arms manufacturing during the War of 1812. His successful development of interchangeable parts for muskets revolutionized not only the arms industry, but also the way products were manufactured. This success cemented Whitney's status as one of the leading inventors and industrialists of the time. The introduction of standardized interchangeable parts for muskets made it possible for the US government to arm its soldiers efficiently, and it became a model for mass production in other industries. Whitney's work, which had started with the cotton gin, now had far-reaching effects on American manufacturing as a whole. Despite his success, Whitney's public image remained complicated. As his name became synonymous with industrial progress, particularly in the North, it was also tied to the realities of Southern agriculture and slavery. The cotton gin, for all its innovation, was also a tool that contributed to the growth of the slave economy. As Whitney's fame spread, so did the moral questions surrounding the unintended consequences of his inventions. The fact that the cotton gin, an invention that had helped modernize agriculture, also helped to entrench the system of slavery, cast a shadow over his public recognition. Yet, in his lifetime, Whitney received much recognition for his achievements. In 1812, he was awarded a gold medal by the American Philosophical Society in recognition of his work with interchangeable parts and arms manufacturing. This recognition reflected his growing stature as an inventor and his significant contributions to American industry. Despite the moral complications of his legacy, Whitney's contributions to the Industrial Revolution in the United States were undeniable. Whitney's recognition was not confined to the United States alone. In Europe, where industrialization was gaining momentum, Whitney's work was admired and followed with interest. His innovations in interchangeable parts were seen as vital contributions to the development of mass production techniques. By the early 19th century, his name had become well known in European industrial circles, and his ideas influenced the growth of factory-based economies across the Atlantic. Whitney's system of interchangeable parts was particularly significant in Europe, where mass production was starting to be adopted in the textile, arms, and other industries. However, despite his fame, Whitney's life was also marked by struggles to gain the recognition and financial reward he believed his work deserved. His difficulties with the patent system, particularly in the early years of his career, meant that much of his financial success came only after years of legal battles. The years of litigation over his cotton gin patent drained his resources and delayed his ability to capitalize on his invention. Even though Whitney became famous for his role in revolutionizing cotton production and manufacturing, the profits from his inventions were often not as great as they might have been. As Whitney entered his later years, his role as an industrial pioneer was cemented, but the complications of his legacy, particularly the role his inventions played in the expansion of slavery, were becoming more evident. While his public recognition as an inventor was secure, Whitney also faced growing questions about the ethical implications of his contributions to American society. Though he had created inventions that propelled the United States into the modern industrial age, these innovations were now inseparably linked to the institution of slavery and the economic system that underpinned it. Whitney's recognition came in many forms through awards, honors, and financial success, but it was tempered by the moral complexities of his work. The fact that the cotton gin, one of his most celebrated inventions, became a tool that contributed to the expansion of slavery was something that Whitney himself grappled with, especially in his later years. He had intended to improve productivity, not perpetuate human suffering, but the unintended consequences of his work left a complicated legacy. Despite these complexities, Whitney's fame and recognition remained largely positive during his lifetime. He was celebrated as a visionary inventor and industrial leader, and his contributions were acknowledged both in the United States and abroad. However, as the United States moved closer to the Civil War, the contradictions inherent in his work became more pronounced. The North and South were increasingly divided over slavery, and Whitney's name, once synonymous with progress, was now also connected to the expansion of a deeply divisive institution. By the time of his death in 1825, Whitney was widely recognized as one of the foremost figures of the American Industrial Revolution. His work in arms manufacturing, cotton production, and mass production techniques had helped to shape the course of American history. Yet the legacy he left behind was not one-dimensional. His fame was rooted in his technological innovations, but it was also inseparable from the moral and social issues of his time. Eli Whitney's contributions to the field of manufacturing were nothing short of transformative. Though much of his legacy is tied to his invention of the cotton gin, it is his work in arms manufacturing, particularly his development of interchangeable parts, that would have an even more profound and lasting impact on American industry. His innovations would lay the foundation for mass production techniques that became central to the Industrial Revolution and shaped the course of manufacturing in the United States and beyond. In the late 18th century, manufacturing in the United States was still in its infancy. Goods were primarily produced by skilled craftsmen who worked on a small scale, often producing one-of-a-kind items. The concept of mass production was not yet realized, and each item, whether it was a musket, a piece of furniture, or a tool, had to be made individually, which was both time-consuming and costly. This artisanal model of production worked for small-scale, localized industries, but it could not meet the demands of a growing economy or the needs of a rapidly expanding population. Whitney's work in arms manufacturing, beginning with his contract to supply muskets to the US government, would change all of that. When Whitney took on the challenge of producing muskets for the military, he faced the daunting task of ensuring that the guns were not only effective but consistent in quality. The US military had been reliant on handcrafted muskets, each made individually by skilled artisans. The idea that parts from different muskets could be interchangeable was a radical one, but Whitney was determined to prove it could work. Whitney's solution was to introduce the concept of interchangeable parts, in which individual parts of a musket, such as the lock, barrel, and stock, could be made to exact specifications and then assembled into a finished product. This approach would require significant innovation in machinery, labor practices, and factory organization. It meant redesigning the production process to ensure that parts were produced with precision and could be easily replaced without the need for custom work. The key to making interchangeable parts feasible was the development of specialized machinery. Whitney's factory in New Haven became one of the first to employ machines that could produce parts with high precision, allowing the workers to mass-produce parts to identical specifications. This precision machinery would be the catalyst for the rise of factory-based production in the United States. Whitney's factory model introduced the idea of dividing labor into specialized tasks, where workers focused on producing specific components rather than assembling entire products from start to finish. This division of labor, along with the use of standardized parts, greatly increased the speed and efficiency of production. Whitney's innovations in manufacturing were not limited to arms production. His work with interchangeable parts would become the standard for future industries in the United States. The principles he introduced were applied to the production of everything from clocks to tools to textiles. The concept of mass production, with standardized components and efficient assembly, revolutionized American manufacturing and allowed industries to scale up their operations to meet growing demand. The success of interchangeable parts would also have a far-reaching impact on the economy of the United States. As the country moved toward industrialization, Whitney's methods would provide the blueprint for the factory-based economy that would dominate the 19th century. The introduction of mass production techniques lowered the cost of manufacturing, made goods more affordable, and spurred the development of new industries. The factory system, based on the principles of interchangeable parts and efficient labor division, became a cornerstone of the American industrial economy. One of the most significant consequences of Whitney's contributions to manufacturing was the way they affected the workforce. As factories adopted mass production techniques, labor became increasingly specialized, and workers were tasked with performing specific tasks repeatedly. While this system greatly increased productivity, it also led to the rise of wage labor and factory work. Workers no longer needed to be highly skilled craftsmen, as machines and division of labor took over many of the tasks previously performed by individual artisans. The factory system, introduced by Whitney's innovations, also meant that workers would be employed in increasingly centralized locations, factories in industrial cities, rather than on small farms or in rural workshops. This shift from agricultural to industrial labor marked a key transition in the American economy. Cities grew as manufacturing hubs, attracting large number of workers seeking employment in the expanding factory system. Whitney's impact on the workforce went beyond his contributions to production. His work helped to establish the idea of large-scale organized industrial production, which became central to the development of modern economies. As mass production techniques spread to other industries, the demands for workers to fill factory positions grew, and the labor force became more diverse, drawing people from rural areas and even from abroad. This shift from an agrarian society to an industrialized economy would continue to shape the United States for decades to come. While Whitney's work with interchangeable parts laid the foundation for American industrialization, it also had a profound impact on the global economy. The principles of mass production and standardized parts were adopted by manufacturers in Europe and beyond. Whitney's influence can be seen in the rise of factories in Britain, where the Industrial Revolution had taken hold, and in the spread of industrialization across the world. Whitney's system of interchangeable parts became a key component of the modern manufacturing process, one that would be refined and expanded in the 19th and 20th centuries. In many ways, Whitney's contributions to manufacturing can be seen as a defining feature of the American Industrial Revolution. He was not just an inventor. He was an industrial pioneer who helped to create the conditions for the mass production economy that would dominate the United States in the 19th century. His innovations in arms manufacturing, particularly the use of interchangeable parts, laid the groundwork for the rise of factories, the development of new industries, and the growth of a national economy driven by manufacturing. Whitney's legacy in manufacturing is one of efficiency, innovation, and transformation. His work reshaped the way goods were produced, made mass production possible, and set the stage for the rise of American industry. Though his inventions and methods were controversial in their time, their impact on the future of manufacturing is undeniable. As Eli Whitney's industrial career progressed, he found himself at the helm of a growing empire, his influence spreading far beyond the cotton gin and arms manufacturing. In his later years, Whitney continued to apply his innovative spirit to a variety of business ventures, each one contributing to the shaping of America's industrial landscape. While his most well-known inventions had already made a lasting mark on the country, Whitney's ventures in the decades following his early successes were a testament to his adaptability and his ability to see opportunity where others might not. In the early 19th century, Whitney's fame and fortune were closely tied to his role in manufacturing arms for the US government. His factory in New Haven, Connecticut, was a pioneering force in the development of interchangeable parts, and the success of his arms manufacturing operations made him one of the wealthiest men in the United States. But Whitney's ambitions extended beyond arms production. As an enterprising businessman, he was always looking for ways to diversify and expand his holdings. One of the key areas in which Whitney sought to expand was in the textile industry. By the early 1800s, the US textile industry was beginning to grow, fueled by the rising demand for cotton. Whitney, seeing an opportunity to capitalize on this growth, became involved in the manufacturing of cotton mills and machinery for the textile industry. His expertise in mass production and interchangeable parts made him uniquely suited to enter the world of textile manufacturing, and he quickly became a key figure in the burgeoning American textile industry. Whitney's expansion into textiles was marked by his involvement in the establishment of a cotton mill in Massachusetts. This venture demonstrated his ability to adapt his industrial knowledge to new fields. The mill utilized the principles of mass production and standardized parts that had already made Whitney famous in the arms industry, and his participation in the venture contributed to the expansion of the American textile industry. The mill's success further solidified Whitney's reputation as a versatile and forward-thinking industrialist. In addition to textiles, Whitney also became involved in other ventures, including mining and agricultural investments. As a businessman, Whitney sought to expand his influence across various sectors, recognizing that the future of American industry was interconnected. His involvement in mining, for instance, was an attempt to tap into the growing demand for raw materials, as industrialization required an increasing supply of metals and minerals. Whitney's diversified business interests helped him maintain his wealth and influence, and his ability to navigate different industries showed his broad understanding of the economic landscape. Whitney's investments in agriculture, particularly in the South, also continued to grow. Though he had created the cotton gin to improve efficiency in cotton production, his increasing involvement in agricultural enterprises in the South demonstrated the entangled relationship between his innovations and the broader system of plantation agriculture. Whitney's investments in land and plantations helped expand the cotton economy, which was, of course, built upon the labor of enslaved people. Though Whitney had invented the cotton gin with the intent of increasing efficiency, he found that his invention contributed to the continued expansion of slavery, a paradox he would continue to confront throughout his life. Despite the moral complexities of his involvement with slavery, Whitney remained one of the leading figures in American business during his later years. His ability to adapt his skills as an inventor and industrialist to new areas of business ensured his continued relevance in the American economy. His ventures in arms manufacturing, textiles, agriculture, and mining were each a reflection of his entrepreneurial vision, and they contributed to the rapid industrialization of the United States in the early 19th century. The expansion of Whitney's business empire also had personal significance. As he grew wealthier, he was able to secure a more comfortable and influential position in American society. He was recognized as one of the most successful and accomplished businessmen of his time. Despite the obstacles he had faced in his earlier career, particularly the difficulties of patent protection and legal battles, Whitney had emerged as a prominent figure in the early American industrial landscape. By the 1820s, Whitney had begun to step back from the day-to-day management of his business ventures. His health, which had been a concern in his later years, led him to delegate more responsibilities to trusted colleagues and family members. However, he continued to maintain a strong influence over his businesses, especially his arms manufacturing operations, which remained a vital part of his wealth and legacy. Whitney's ability to guide and grow his businesses during this period reflected his deep understanding of industrial development and his ongoing commitment to American economic progress. In addition to his industrial pursuits, Whitney's later years were marked by his involvement in various philanthropic endeavors. As one of the wealthiest men in the United States, he used his influence to support causes that he believed would help the country's development. Though his contributions were often overshadowed by his business activities, Whitney was recognized as a benefactor in the Connecticut community, where he had established his manufacturing operations. Despite the success and influence he achieved in his later years, Whitney's legacy remained complex. His inventions and business ventures were undeniably instrumental in the development of the United States as an industrial power, but they were also tied to the systems of slavery and exploitation that shaped much of the nation's economy. Whitney's role in perpetuating slavery through his cotton gin was something he struggled with in his later years, and his reflections on his legacy were marked by an awareness of the moral contradictions at play. Whitney died in 1825 at the age of 59, leaving behind a legacy that would be felt for generations to come. His contributions to manufacturing, arms production, and the cotton industry helped lay the foundation for the industrialization of the United States. Yet the complexities of his work, particularly its role in perpetuating slavery, meant that his legacy was not without its contradictions. Whitney had helped create the modern industrial world, but he had also helped sustain an economy that relied on the exploitation of enslaved people. As Eli Whitney's cotton gin continued to spread throughout the southern United States, and his inventions in arms manufacturing and interchangeable parts began to transform industry in the North, a larger economic and social divide was emerging. The innovations that Whitney pioneered played a crucial role in driving the development of two distinct economies in the United States, one largely agricultural, dependent on slave labor in the South, and the other industrial, developing rapidly in the North. The cotton gin, which had revolutionized cotton production and made it vastly more efficient, became the driving force behind the economic prosperity of the South. Cotton, now easily processed, quickly became the South's most lucrative crop, leading to an explosion in the size of plantations and the number of enslaved people needed to harvest the cotton. The demand for cotton spiked, particularly from textile mills in Britain and the growing industrial economy of the North, fueling the expansion of slavery. Whitney's invention, while it had made cotton farming more efficient, also deepened the South's dependence on slavery, a system that was increasingly at odds with the abolitionist movement growing in the northern states. At the same time, the industrial North was experiencing its own economic boom, driven by innovations like Whitney's interchangeable parts and mass production methods. Whitney's success in manufacturing firearms, textiles, and other goods with standardized parts set the stage for the rise of factories and large-scale industry. The northern states, with their growing manufacturing base, relied heavily on wage labor and a factory-based economy that stood in stark contrast to the agricultural slave economy of the South. Cities in the North, such as New York, Boston, and Philadelphia, became centers of industry, trade, and commerce, while the South remained largely rural and dependent on agriculture. This growing economic disparity was not only reflected in the different types of labor used in the North and South, but also in the political climate. The North's increasing industrialization and the moral arguments against slavery created tensions with the South, where the economy and way of life were deeply rooted in the use of enslaved labor. Whitney's cotton gin, while a symbol of technological progress, also became a symbol of the South's reliance on slavery. The cotton economy it helped create was now inseparably linked to the system of human exploitation, and the rise of the North's industrial economy, which increasingly viewed slavery as morally reprehensible, only intensified these divisions. In the early 19th century, as the North became more industrialized, it began to push for changes that would have national consequences. One of the key points of contention was the issue of slavery, which had become deeply embedded in the Southern economy. The North, with its growing abolitionist movement, called for the abolition of slavery, while the South, heavily invested in cotton production and the labor of enslaved people, sought to protect it. The political landscape became increasingly polarized, with the South arguing for states' rights and the preservation of slavery, while the North advocated for federal intervention to curb the expansion of slavery into new territories. The divide was further exacerbated by the role of the federal government in supporting industry and agriculture. The North, with its industrial economy, called for protective tariffs to shield its growing factories from foreign competition, while the South, which relied on cotton exports, opposed tariffs that would raise the cost of imported goods. The government's economic policies, especially its support for industry, increasingly alienated the South, which felt that its agricultural economy, built on cotton and slave labor, was being unfairly targeted. Whitney, through his inventions, had played a central role in this divide. The cotton gin, which had revolutionized Southern agriculture, had made cotton the backbone of the South's economy. Yet it had also made slavery more entrenched, as the demand for cotton led to an increased reliance on enslaved workers. The gin had inadvertently become a tool that sustained the very system of labor that the North was now seeking to abolish. The North, with its growing industrial base, saw slavery as a moral issue and a barrier to progress, while the South saw it as essential to its economic survival. Whitney's invention, a symbol of technological progress, had unwittingly become a symbol of the South's commitment to slavery. This divide, which was largely economic at first, soon became political and social. The growing tensions between the North and South over slavery and industrialization led to a series of compromises in Congress, such as the Missouri Compromise of 1820 and the Compromise of 1850, aimed at maintaining the balance of power between free and slave states. These compromises were temporary solutions to the larger issue of slavery's expansion into new territories. However, the debate over slavery would continue to escalate, eventually leading to the secession of Southern states and the outbreak of the Civil War in 1861. Whitney, in his later years, was likely aware of the growing tensions that his inventions had helped to fuel. While his cotton gin had brought great economic success to the South, it had also made slavery more entrenched, contributing to the moral and political divide between the North and South. The very innovation that had fueled the Southern economy had also played a role in the deepening sectionalism that would tear the nation apart. Whitney's legacy, therefore, is both one of technological achievement and unintended consequence. His work had helped lay the foundation for the industrialization of the United States, but it had also contributed to the expansion of a brutal system that would have devastating effects on the nation's future. In the broader context of American history, Whitney's contributions highlight the complexities of technological progress. While his inventions were designed to improve efficiency and productivity, they also played a role in reinforcing existing social and economic structures. The cotton gin, in particular, was a double-edged sword. While it brought prosperity to the South, it also deepened the nation's reliance on slavery. Whitney's innovations, which helped usher in an era of industrialization, were inextricably linked to the historical forces that would culminate in the Civil War. Though Eli Whitney passed away in 1825, his influence on American industry did not fade with his death. Instead, his innovations and the legacy of his work continued to shape the course of the nation's industrial development long after he was gone. The principles he introduced, particularly those related to interchangeable parts and mass production, became the backbone of America's transformation into an industrial powerhouse. Whitney's system of interchangeable parts, first applied to the production of muskets for the US government, laid the foundation for mass production across numerous industries. His factory in New Haven had pioneered the use of specialized machinery to produce parts with a high degree of precision, allowing workers to mass-produce components that could be easily assembled into finished products. This idea of standardizing parts and using division of labor revolutionized manufacturing in the United States, and it soon spread to other industries. In the years following Whitney's work with interchangeable parts, his influence on American industry became more pronounced. The factory system he helped establish became the model for industries ranging from textiles to automobiles. As factories adopted the methods Whitney had introduced, the scale of production grew and new industries were born. The concept of mass production became central to the economic development of the United States in the 19th and 20th centuries, and Whitney's innovations were instrumental in this shift from small-scale, handcraft-based manufacturing to large-scale, machine-driven production. The success of Whitney's interchangeable parts also helped pave the way for the expansion of the US military-industrial complex. His system allowed for the mass production of weapons, not only for the US government but also for commercial markets. As the United States moved toward a more industrialized economy, the ability to produce reliable, standardized goods became increasingly important, and Whitney's methods of production played a central role in this transformation. Whitney's influence extended well beyond the military and arms manufacturing. His work also had a lasting impact on the growth of the textile industry in the United States. By the early 19th century, cotton mills were proliferating in New England, fueled by the demand for cotton in textile mills and the expansion of cotton farming in the South. Whitney's invention of the cotton gin had already made cotton a valuable crop, but his innovations in manufacturing also allowed for the development of more efficient textile machinery. The standardization of parts in these mills, much like in arms production, allowed for the rapid production of textiles and helped establish the US as a major player in the global textile market. As American industry continued to expand, Whitney's ideas about mass production, standardized parts, and factory-based labor became integral to the growth of a wide range of industries, from transportation to agriculture. The factory system that Whitney helped create became the foundation of the American industrial economy, shaping the way goods were produced and transforming the workforce. Whitney's influence on American industry also extended internationally. By the late 19th century, the principles of interchangeable parts had spread beyond the United States to Europe and other parts of the world. His innovations in mass production were adopted by industries in Great Britain, where the Industrial Revolution was already well underway, and his work contributed to the spread of industrialization across the globe. The impact of Whitney's work, therefore, was not confined to the United States. It played a crucial role in the broader process of global industrialization, which reshaped economies and societies around the world. Despite his widespread influence, Whitney's legacy remained complicated. The same innovations that helped transform American industry also had unintended consequences, particularly with regard to slavery. The cotton gin, which was celebrated for its ability to increase cotton production, also made slavery more entrenched in the South. The increase in cotton farming led to the expansion of slave labor, and Whitney's invention, while improving efficiency, inadvertently contributed to the system of human exploitation that defined the Southern economy. Whitney, who had once opposed slavery, found that his work had, in some ways, helped perpetuate it. In his later years, Whitney likely reflected on the moral complexities of his inventions. Though he had sought to improve productivity and make industries more efficient, the social and economic consequences of his work were intertwined with the institution of slavery. His contributions to American industry, while groundbreaking, also helped sustain systems of inequality and exploitation. Whitney's legacy, therefore, is one of both progress and paradox, a testament to the power of innovation, but also a reminder of the unintended consequences that accompany technological advancement. Even so, Whitney's influence on American industry cannot be overstated. His work helped to lay the groundwork for the industrialization of the United States, and his methods of production became central to the country's economic success. The rise of factories, the spread of mass production techniques, and the growth of industries like textiles, arms manufacturing, and transportation all owe much to the principles Whitney introduced. His contributions to the development of the factory system and interchangeable parts were foundational to the growth of modern industrial economies, and his legacy continues to shape the way goods are produced today. Whitney's impact on American industry was not just limited to the practical application of his inventions. He also played a key role in shaping the way Americans thought about labor, manufacturing, and technology. His work helped define the industrial ethos of the United States, the belief that innovation, efficiency, and mass production were central to national progress. Whitney's influence was felt not only in the factories and mills where his innovations were applied, but also in the broader culture of American entrepreneurship and industry. Though Whitney's contributions to American industry were central to the nation's economic development, his legacy remains a reminder of the complexities of progress. His work revolutionized manufacturing, but it also contributed to the continuation of slavery in the South. The duality of his legacy, both a force for economic progress and a reminder of the moral contradictions of American society, marks Whitney as one of the most significant figures in the history of American industry. Eli Whitney's contributions to American industry, particularly through his innovations in interchangeable parts and mass production, had far-reaching effects, not just on the economy, but also on the nature of labor in the United States. His work set the stage for the development of a factory-based economy, one in which the division of labor and specialized tasks would become central to production. While these changes increased efficiency and spurred economic growth, they also brought about significant shifts in the labor force, including the rise of wage labor, the growth of industrial cities, and the harsh working conditions that characterized early American factories. Whitney's system of interchangeable parts, first introduced in arms manufacturing, helped revolutionize how goods were produced in the United States. By creating standardized parts that could be easily assembled into complete products, Whitney's innovation removed the need for skilled artisans to handcraft every individual component. This in turn lowered production costs, made goods more affordable, and allowed for the mass production of items ranging from muskets to textiles. The efficiency of this system also made it possible for factories to operate on a much larger scale, producing goods in quantities that had never been seen before. The widespread adoption of interchangeable parts and mass production techniques created a demand for factory workers who could perform repetitive tasks in a specialized way. This led to the rise of wage labor, workers who were paid for their labor rather than being compensated for the skill they brought to the production process. This shift marked a departure from the traditional system of artisanal production, where skilled craftsmen were paid for their expertise in creating individual, custom products. In the new factory system, workers were hired to perform specific tasks, such as operating machines or assembling standardized parts, and were compensated based on the quantity of work they could complete, rather than the skill involved in the work itself. The division of labor that emerged in Whitney's factories became the cornerstone of industrial production in the United States. By breaking down the production process into smaller, specialized tasks, factories were able to increase their output and reduce the time needed to produce goods. Workers were expected to master a single task, often performing it repetitively for long hours. This efficiency-driven model made mass production possible, but it also introduced new challenges and concerns for the labor force. The factory system created a growing demand for unskilled workers who could be trained quickly to perform specialized tasks. This shift in labor dynamics was particularly important for industrial cities, where factories drew large numbers of workers, often from rural areas, in search of employment. The rise of wage labor also led to the growth of urban areas as people moved from farms to factory towns, contributing to the rise of industrial centers like Lowell, Massachusetts, and Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. These cities became the heart of America's industrial expansion, attracting large numbers of workers, including immigrants, who sought jobs in the factories. However, the growth of the factory system and the rise of wage labor were not without their consequences. While mass production techniques increased efficiency and helped fuel economic growth, the labor conditions in early factories were often harsh. Factory workers, including women and children, were required to work long hours, often 12-hour days, 6 days a week, in unsafe and unsanitary conditions. The work was physically demanding, and the repetitive nature of the tasks led to high rates of injury and exhaustion. For many workers, factory labor was grueling and poorly paid, with few protections or rights. The rise of wage labor also contributed to the development of class divisions within American society. The factory system created a new industrial working class, separate from the elite owners and managers of factories. These workers often lived in crowded, poorly constructed housing near the factories, where they faced unsanitary conditions and struggled to make ends meet. While the owners and industrialists profited from mass production, the workers who made that production possible often did so under harsh conditions with little opportunity for upward mobility. Whitney's innovations also had an impact on the nature of skilled labor. The factory system, with its emphasis on specialization, diminished the need for highly skilled workers. Artisans, who had once enjoyed a high level of independence and craftsmanship, found their roles diminished as factories took over production. In some cases, workers were replaced by machines or new manufacturing processes that required less training. While this shift led to the growth of a more standardized, efficient system of production, it also meant that many skilled craftsmen were left without work or had to adapt to new ways of working that were less rewarding. The transformation of labor under Whitney's system was not limited to the United States. His innovations in interchangeable parts and mass production had a global impact, influencing industrial practices in Europe and other parts of the world. Factories in Britain, for example, adopted similar methods of production, which helped fuel the Industrial Revolution there. Whitney's work played a key role in the global spread of industrialization, influencing how goods were produced, how labor was organized, and how economies were structured. Despite the economic growth driven by Whitney's innovations, the changes in the labor system were met with resistance in some quarters. In the United States, the rise of industrial capitalism and the factory system led to the development of labor movements aimed at improving working conditions and advocating for workers' rights. As the industrial economy continued to expand, workers began to organize for better wages, shorter hours, and safer working conditions. These early labor movements laid the groundwork for future unionization efforts and the fight for workers' rights, which would continue to shape American labor policy throughout the 19th and 20th centuries. In Whitney's time, however, The labor system was still in its infancy, and the struggle for workers' rights was just beginning. The factory system, with its reliance on wage labor, represented a dramatic shift in how Americans worked, and it set the stage for the growing influence of industrialists and capitalists in the economy. While Whitney's innovations had helped fuel the growth of the American industrial economy, they also contributed to the exploitation of the working class and the deepening divisions between the owners of industry and the laborers who powered it. Eli Whitney's contributions to American industry were transformative, but his impact on American society extended beyond the factory floors and the cotton fields. Whitney was a central figure in the early days of American industrialization, and his innovations, particularly the cotton gin and the system of interchangeable parts, reshaped not only the economy, but also the way Americans viewed work, progress, and technological advancement. As the United States moved through the 19th century, Whitney's inventions would continue to be a part of the nation's cultural fabric, influencing everything from manufacturing to national identity. Whitney's cotton gin, for all its economic and social consequences, symbolized the power of invention and the potential for innovation to solve practical problems. The cotton gin made Whitney an iconic figure in American culture, someone whose ingenuity had helped to unlock the economic potential of the United States. In many ways, the cotton gin served as a reminder of the promise of America itself, a nation founded on the ideals of innovation, self-reliance, and opportunity. Whitney's success as an inventor represented the American dream, a story of someone who started from humble beginnings and through hard work and ingenuity changed the course of history. Yet, Whitney's legacy was also a paradox. His cotton gin, while instrumental in propelling the South to prosperity, also played a key role in the entrenchment of slavery. The gin made cotton cultivation more efficient, but it also made slavery more economically viable, and, in the years that followed, helped solidify the social and economic systems that depended on human exploitation. This contradiction in Whitney's legacy would become a defining feature of his life's work. While he was celebrated as an innovator, his invention inadvertently contributed to the very divisions in American society that would eventually lead to the Civil War. Despite the moral complexities of his work, Whitney's innovations in arms manufacturing and interchangeable parts had a similarly far-reaching effect on American society. His work in mass production and standardized parts laid the groundwork for the factory-based system that would dominate American industry for much of the 19th and 20th centuries. The principles he introduced would be adopted across a wide range of industries, from textiles to transportation, and would help shape the economic landscape of the United States. Whitney's contributions to manufacturing helped to usher in an era of mass production, transforming not just how goods were produced, but how they were consumed. As factories began to dominate the American landscape, Whitney's legacy was also reflected in the way labor was organized and the role of workers in society. The division of labor and specialization that he pioneered in arms manufacturing became a model for the expanding industrial economy. In many ways, the rise of industrial labor was a direct result of Whitney's system of interchangeable parts. However, this new system of production also introduced social and economic challenges. While mass production made goods more affordable and efficient, it also created a new class of workers who were often subject to poor working conditions, long hours, and low wages. This shift in labor relations, made possible by Whitney's innovations, would eventually fuel the rise of labor movements in the United States, as workers sought to improve their rights and conditions. Whitney's innovations also had a profound influence on American culture. His success as an inventor reinforced the nation's belief in the power of individual ingenuity and the potential for progress through technological advancement. Whitney, like many of his contemporaries, embodied the spirit of American exceptionalism, the belief that the United States was uniquely positioned to lead the world in innovation and technological progress. His life and work became a symbol of the nation's growing industrial power and its ability to shape the future through invention. Beyond the realm of business and industry, Whitney's influence extended to the broader development of American national identity. His work contributed to the shaping of the American industrial economy, and as the United States grew into a global economic power, Whitney's innovations were an important part of the country's rise. The factory system, mass production, and interchangeable parts all played crucial roles in the development of the nation's economic might. As the U.S. became more industrialized, Whitney's contributions were recognized as essential in shaping the country's identity as a modern, innovative, and powerful nation. However, Whitney's legacy also exposed the limits of America's idealized notion of progress. While his inventions and innovations were central to the country's economic success, they were also inextricably linked to the exploitation of both labor and enslaved people. Whitney's cotton gin, which had helped establish the United States as a major cotton exporter, also played a key role in expanding the system of slavery that would divide the nation. In this sense, Whitney's legacy was a reflection of the contradictions inherent in the American experience, where progress and exploitation coexisted side by side, and where innovation was both a force for good and a contributor to social and moral injustices. Whitney's life and work embodied the complexities of America's rise to industrial prominence. His story was one of innovation and achievement, but also of unintended consequences and moral dilemmas. Whitney's legacy, in many ways, mirrored the larger narrative of American history, the story of a nation that was defined by progress, but also by its failures to confront the darker aspects of its social and economic systems. As the United States continued to evolve throughout the 19th century, Whitney's innovations remained a critical part of the nation's industrial identity. His work in arms manufacturing, the cotton gin, and interchangeable parts laid the groundwork for the factory-based economy that would come to dominate American industry. But his inventions also highlighted the complexities of progress, as they were bound up with the very systems of inequality and exploitation that would shape the country's future. Whitney's lasting impact on American society was both a triumph of technological advancement and a reminder of the moral complexities that progress often entails. Eli Whitney's innovations, particularly the cotton gin, and his work with interchangeable parts, were pivotal in shaping the industrial landscape of the United States. However, for all the good they did in advancing technology and improving productivity, these inventions also had unintended consequences that profoundly affected the social, political, and economic fabric of the country. Whitney, who intended to solve practical problems with his inventions, could not have foreseen how they would ultimately contribute to the perpetuation of slavery, deepen the divide between the North and South, and shape the course of American history in ways that were both beneficial and deeply problematic. The cotton gin, perhaps Whitney's most famous invention, was designed to address a simple but crucial problem: the laborious task of separating cotton fibers from the seeds. Prior to its invention, cotton production in the United States was slow and inefficient, requiring a tremendous amount of manual labor. Whitney's machine dramatically increased efficiency, allowing a single worker to process 50 pounds of cotton in a single day, an amount that would have taken hours or even days to do by hand. This innovation was welcomed by plantation owners, who now had a tool that could help them increase their cotton output, a crop that had long been a staple of the Southern economy. However, while the cotton gin revolutionized cotton production and made the South a global hub for cotton exports, it also had a darker side. The newfound profitability of cotton farming made possible by the gin led to an expansion of the plantation economy and, consequently, the demand for enslaved labor. Whitney's cotton gin, which had been designed to improve agricultural efficiency, inadvertently entrenched the system of slavery in the South. The gin did not eliminate the need for manual labor. It simply made cotton farming more profitable, which in turn made slavery even more economically viable. The unintended consequence of this was that the cotton gin contributed to the expansion of the very system Whitney had opposed. While the North increasingly embraced industrialization and began to view slavery as morally reprehensible, the South became more deeply entrenched in the institution. Whitney's invention, which had been a symbol of progress, now became a tool of exploitation. The efficiency of cotton production allowed plantation owners to produce vast quantities of cotton, and this success was inextricably linked to the forced labor of enslaved people. This growing dependence on slavery in the South created a profound political divide between the North and South. The North, which was rapidly industrializing, saw slavery as morally unjust and a hindrance to progress. The South, on the other hand, viewed slavery as essential to its economic prosperity. Whitney's cotton gin, in its role as a catalyst for the South's cotton-based economy, inadvertently exacerbated tensions between the two regions. As the nation's economic systems grew further apart, so did its political ideologies, ultimately leading to the secession of southern states and the outbreak of the Civil War. While Whitney's cotton gin had far-reaching social and political consequences, his work with interchangeable parts also had unintended effects on the labor force and the structure of American industry. The system of interchangeable parts, which Whitney developed to mass-produce firearms for the US military, allowed for the creation of standardized products with consistent quality. This innovation would become the foundation for the factory-based system that would dominate American manufacturing for much of the 19th and 20th centuries. But the rise of factory-based mass production also led to the rise of wage labor. As workers were hired to perform repetitive, specialized tasks, this shift from skilled craftsmanship to unskilled labor was a hallmark of the Industrial Revolution, and it had significant social and economic consequences. While factories increased productivity and created jobs, they also subjected workers to long hours, low wages, and poor working conditions. The work was often grueling and monotonous, with little room for creativity or autonomy. Labor became increasingly divided between those who owned the factories and those who worked in them, leading to a growing class divide between industrial capitalists and the working class. Whitney's system of interchangeable parts also contributed to the rise of industrial cities. As factories proliferated and mass production became the norm, people flocked to urban areas in search of work. The growth of cities like Lowell, Massachusetts, and Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, reflected the shift from an agrarian economy to an industrial one. While these cities offered economic opportunities, they also became centers of exploitation, as factory workers often faced harsh living conditions and little protection from employers. Whitney's innovations, then, while essential to the rise of American industry, also contributed to the challenges of industrial labor. The factory system that grew out of his work led to the mass production of goods, but also to the exploitation of workers, particularly women, children, and immigrants, who were often the most vulnerable in the new industrial economy. As industrialization took hold, labor movements began to emerge, advocating for better working conditions, shorter hours, and higher wages. Whitney's legacy in manufacturing, which had helped shape the modern economy, also left behind a system that would require reform to address the injustices it had inadvertently created. The broader unintended consequences of Whitney's inventions remind us that technological progress, while often beneficial in the short term, can have far-reaching effects that shape the social and political landscape in unexpected ways. Whitney's cotton gin, intended to improve the efficiency of cotton production, became a tool that entrenched slavery, a system that would define the South and fuel the nation's most devastating conflict. Similarly, His work with interchangeable parts helped to lay the foundation for mass production and industrialization, but it also created a system of labor exploitation that would require decades of struggle to address. Whitney's life and work are a reminder that innovation is never without its complexities. While technological advancements can drive economic growth and improve living standards, they can also create new challenges and exacerbate existing inequalities. Whitney's inventions were undeniably transformative, but they also contributed to the expansion of systems of exploitation and division. His legacy, then, is a double-edged sword, a story of progress and achievement, but also a reminder of the unintended consequences that often accompany technological change. Eli Whitney's legacy stands as one of the most significant in American history. His inventions, particularly the cotton gin and the system of interchangeable parts, transformed the United States economically, socially, and politically. While the consequences of his work were complex and in some cases deeply troubling, there is no question that his contributions laid the foundation for the industrialization of the country. Whitney's innovations in manufacturing and agriculture helped shape the United States into an industrial power, but they also revealed the contradictions and moral dilemmas of progress. Whitney's cotton gin, which revolutionized cotton production in the South, is often cited as one of the most important inventions in American history. It dramatically increased the efficiency of cotton farming, making cotton the backbone of the Southern economy. However, the gin also had the unintended consequence of entrenching slavery, as the demand for labor to harvest the cotton surged. Whitney's machine did not eliminate the need for human labor. Instead, it made cotton farming more profitable, which in turn expanded the use of enslaved people. While Whitney may not have intended to contribute to the growth of slavery, his invention inadvertently strengthened the system of human exploitation in the South, creating a moral paradox that would echo throughout the history of the United States. In the years that followed the invention of the cotton gin, Whitney's work in arms manufacturing and interchangeable parts would also leave a profound impact on the American economy. The principles he introduced, standardization, mass production, and specialization of labor, formed the bedrock of industrial manufacturing. Whitney's factory system, which produced muskets with interchangeable parts, set the stage for the industrialization of a variety of industries. His work laid the foundation for the factory-based economy that would dominate the United States in the 19th and 20th centuries, from textiles to transportation to consumer goods. The rise of mass production, which Whitney helped pioneer, had far-reaching effects on labor and society. The system of interchangeable parts not only increased the efficiency of manufacturing, but also transformed the nature of work. Factory labor became more specialized and less reliant on skilled artisans, leading to the rise of wage labor and the growth of industrial cities. While these changes spurred economic growth, they also created new social divisions. The rise of the industrial working class, often subjected to long hours, low wages, and poor working conditions, became a source of tension in the years to come. Whitney's innovations, while instrumental in making the US a global industrial leader, also helped shape a system of labor that required reform. Whitney's legacy was also complicated by the broader implications of his work in the context of slavery. The cotton gin, while a marvel of invention, was inseparable from the system of forced labor that underpinned the Southern economy. Whitney, who had grown up in the North and had initially opposed slavery, found himself in the difficult position of realizing that his most famous invention had helped sustain the very institution he had once opposed. This tension between his technological achievements and their moral consequences would continue to shape public perceptions of his legacy long after his death. Despite these contradictions, Whitney's impact on American industry and society cannot be overstated. He was one of the key figures in the development of the American industrial economy. His contributions to the fields of manufacturing, agriculture, and technology helped lay the groundwork for the rise of the United States as a global industrial power. The principles he introduced, interchangeable parts, division of labor, and mass production, became central to the development of the American economy and the rise of modern manufacturing. Furthermore, Whitney's legacy as an inventor and industrial pioneer helped shape American ideals about progress, innovation, and the role of the individual in society. His work embodied the belief in the power of invention to solve practical problems and create economic opportunity. In many ways, Whitney's life and career served as a model for future generations of American inventors and entrepreneurs who looked to his success as evidence of the potential for innovation to transform society. As we reflect on the life and work of Eli Whitney, we're reminded of the profound impact one individual can have on the course of history. Whitney's inventions, particularly the cotton gin and his innovations in interchangeable parts, helped shape the industrial landscape of the United States and the world. His work was instrumental in the rise of American manufacturing, the expansion of cotton agriculture, and the growth of an industrial economy that would become a global powerhouse. Yet, as with all great innovations, Whitney's contributions were not without complexity. The very machine that revolutionized cotton production, the cotton gin, became a symbol of the contradictions at the heart of American society. While it spurred economic growth and transformed industries, it also contributed to the entrenchment of slavery in the South, leading to a moral dilemma that Whitney himself would struggle with. His legacy, then, is a reminder that progress, while often beneficial, can also bring unintended consequences. Whitney's work in interchangeable parts and mass production would lay the foundation for modern industrial practices and continue to shape the development of American industry for generations to come. The principles of standardization, efficiency, and specialization that he pioneered are still central to the way goods are produced today. In this way, Whitney's influence extends far beyond his lifetime, serving as a testament to the power of innovation in driving change. However, his legacy is also a reflection of the complex and sometimes painful realities of that change. The expansion of industry, while propelling the nation forward, also exposed the inequalities of labor and the exploitation of workers. Whitney's work helped to forge an industrial economy that relied on the same systems of inequality and division that would eventually lead to conflict and strife. Ultimately, Whitney's life is a story of ambition, innovation, and the far-reaching impact of invention. His legacy serves as a reminder of the intricate relationship between progress and its consequences, both the positive and the negative, and how the course of history is shaped by the choices, actions, and inventions of individuals. Whitney's contributions to American industry, though marked by moral complexities, helped to define the industrial age, and his legacy remains a powerful force in the ongoing story of innovation and its role in shaping the world. As we close this exploration of Eli Whitney's life, we acknowledge not only his triumphs, but also the challenges and contradictions that came with them. His story, like so many others, is one of both achievement and reflection, a legacy that continues to influence and inform our understanding of progress, industry, and the complicated tapestry of American history.